Mayor Holland. Mayor Pro Tem Taylor.
Here.
Commissioner Brownlow.
Here.
Commissioner Sanderson.
Here.
Commissioner Sawyer. Commissioner Wooten.
Here.
I'd like to make a motion to excuse Mayor Holland and Commissioner Sawyer, please.
All right, there's a motion on the floor to excuse Mayor Holland and Commissioner Sawyers. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? It passed. All right. Opening prayer. Bow your heads. That was supposed to be Mayor. I'll say it today. Ladies and gentlemen, please be with me tonight. Let me guide this meeting the best I can with my capabilities. Be with Emerald Isle tonight. It's an important meeting for us tonight. We've had our budget going on. Let us make the right decisions for the majority of Emerald Isle. Let us do what's right for the people, and be with each one of us up here as we make these critical decisions that are going to affect us, not only for the upcoming year, but for many years in the future. Amen. Amen. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to make need a motion to adoption of the agenda, please, by one of the board members.
Make a motion to adopt the agenda.
There's a motion on the floor to adopt the agenda by Commissioner. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Passed unanimously. Item number 6 is funding balance available. And I'll hand that off to our lovely manager over there and lead the pack, sir. I had to hold it down for about 3 seconds to make
The
it
other
work.
side, you had it. There you go.
There we go. This required some expertise that I didn't have. Okay, well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you being here tonight. We are going to review these things as quickly as we can and leave as much time for commission discussion and insights as possible. But we've got some really important information that supplements the budget document and puts in perspective some of the things that were recommended. One other thing that I want to point out to those who are listening and watching, this budget was prepared with some knowledge of what was going on in other communities that are impactful to Emerald Isle in terms of budget recommendations, particularly the counties and the other municipalities. Not a lot has changed from the state level, but we now have insights into the recommended budgets in the other municipalities and the county, which have significance and bearing on the recommendations that the town has considered. So we'll supplement what you already knew from our recommendation with some additional information. Without further ado, unless there's questions, we'll go right into the adjusted fund balance discussion. Our finance director has done an excellent job of putting you the historical document there. That's a review of some things you've seen in the past that gives you insight. But we want to make you aware of one of the implications for this that we just became aware of from the state representatives and federal representatives regarding FEMA reimbursements and funds. The state and feds are notorious for very deliberate actions when they, I'll be as kind as I can, when they're approving the release of funds to reimburse local governments. As you are likely aware, local governments have to spend the money up front, then you apply for reimbursement and you provide all the necessary documentation. And that process can be very, very slow. It is very, very slow and always has been. And Laura just got some new information that has implications for the general fund balance that we want to share with the board long before the audit is done and the analysis is done of the city's, the town's financial position for the end of the close of the fiscal year. That'll be coming up June 30th. So I'll stop and let Laura update you on that.
Sure, and I think I'll use the slides. Control room, thank you. Greg and Mark back there. Thanks. All right. Thank you, Randy. So we did put a couple of slides up about adjusted fund balance and available fund balance. And there's two calculations, just as a reminder. This document is in the budget book. It's actually page 23, and I just made a modification to the projected 2025 number there. I don't know exactly what that number is going to be, but we're getting closer. But I had projected a surplus, or in the town departments in the budget, we are expecting a small surplus in our current year. But as Randy mentioned, one of our FEMA projects, it's the one that primarily is our generators, stormwater generators, the beach access walkways. That was a significant dollar amount. We're about $960,000 in a reimbursement request waiting on that. And we pushed hard to try to see if we could get that in advance of June 30 because it affects our books. Because we paid it out essentially with general fund monies, and now we're waiting for that. And it's good. They've got all the documentation they need, but they sent me the email, as Randy mentioned, and said you're probably not going to see that before June 30, which will just affect our final results at that snapshot of June 30. We should get it back, shortly thereafter, but that's our measurement date. And so. With that being, they are going to reimburse, I want to say $173,000 of it that we think we're going to get before June 30. So I took that calculation that we had in this budget book and I subtracted out right about $750,000. So that would just drop our adjusted fund balance down. And so we just wanted to show this as just an update. Last year in 2024, and I'm going to flip to my notes, doing great. Microphone. We had 38% when we look at our policy, which is the adjusted fund balance policy. 38% is above our 25% limit, so we're doing good there. We want to get close to 50% eventually. So if these numbers come true, when I do the estimations, we could be, looking at a small drop there, 33% or 32.55. The other measurement that we always show is the statutory calculation, which is fund balance available. And as you can see, they don't allow us to use all of our fund balance because it's not in a liquid form. And so we might fall under that 25%. I don't know what those final numbers are going to be. That was just my initial calculations if we don't get that reimbursement in time. And so not the end of the world, but we want to be above 25%. When we drop below, we have to notify the local government commission. There's, some formalities that we have to go through, and they have been accepting of the explanation of it being a waiting on a FEMA reimbursement in the past, so I'm not too concerned, but, just wanted to let you know that might be something that we see. And maybe we get lucky and we're right at 25%, but that was why we wanted to show you that today and bring it up in today's agenda. So, and I'll just kind of pause there, and if Randy, if you have anything else, or if the board has any questions about that.
Yeah, I think we'd like to hear any comments or questions from the board because we just don't need surprises. We want to make sure everybody's clear on the understanding, the implications. As Laura pointed out, this is a snapshot in time. It's not going to be impactful for operations, but it does put additional burden on finance to respond and to the board. But we don't want the public perceiving that there's a financial issue either, because it is just a timing aspect. So we'll stop for any questions.
How often, is this just a once-a-year snapshot, or do you do like quarterly reporting? Is there?
Just once a year. Yep,
Okay.
yep. And that's when the audit is complete. So we, the auditor, is required to, but we send several ratios, and usually the one that the town is always focused on is the fund balance available, but it's right at audit, so that'll be right close to September, October timeframe.
And they put audit notes in that say, here's the circumstances.
Yep, and so there's some don't have it handy right now, I wish I had it, but they compare us to other towns with expenditures in our budget area, or over 10 million, for example. And so when we fall under that number, 25 in particular, and then they show median numbers that, you know, they want us to have that cushion, the LGC does. And so they've put in some additional requirements. The auditor has to present it at a public meeting, make sure that the full board is aware of it, you know, just all that transparency. And then we just respond and let them know what we're doing to get out of that, you know, to build up our fund balance. So,
And
so
this
I
is-
hope, yeah, I hope we make the 25%, but it looks awful close if we don't get that reimbursement, so.
Yeah, and I think that's the conservative way to approach it. The only implications, it is a snapshot in time, but fortunately, it'll be cured well before the audit has to be done, so that'll be reflected in the audit that it was cured after the fact. But that doesn't deter the LGC on the state level from still sending out the nasty letter and all the other stuff that goes with it, doing their job of policing these matters.
That was something I had a concern about, was the reliance upon the FEMA reimbursements on so many projects and so many items. And now with the DOJ happening and everything, I was wondering if, when Laura said, you know, we could build up our fund balance, how are some ways we could build up our fund balance?
Well, one of the keys is what was mentioned in the narrative of the budget, is avoiding appropriation of unencumbered fund balance till you achieve a goal. If the goal is to get to 40 or 50% liquidity, I'll call it, from a business standpoint. And I think it's important for the town to set that goal and try to adhere to it. You know, you don't want to miss on opportunities to use funds to match grants, do other things. But at the same token, we know we're susceptible to those annual storm season that we all know without saying that H word. The implications are always significant, and the town has to front a lot of money during an event like that, and it takes sometimes as much as a couple of years or longer to get fully reimbursed by the time you do the project. And if you don't have available funding, that forces you to have to go borrow a temporary note or something. And that's just an unnecessary expense and effort. And it's not sitting there and being wasted. If money is in reserves, it is its own revenue source, because the interest earnings, as those become more like they have in the last year or two, you know, interest earnings are now a viable option. There for a few years, we didn't get any interest earnings, but that had its own positive effects. But that was one of the negatives. So it generates additional revenue that avoids you having to generate it from other sources like property tax or whatever. So there's nothing really a downside to having a reserve, particularly a robust reserve for a oceanfront community on a barrier island. Is never frowned upon in local government circles in terms of finance because of the exposure you have. So anyway, this is much for just information for the public, to give the commission fodder, if you will, or ammunition if someone challenges you on reserve funds and levels and so forth. This is exactly why you need it, because you never know when the timing is going to hit. You have a substantial, almost $1 million, even though we're going to get part of it, we anticipate, is a lot of money for when you look at it in context with our budget size. That's a big ticket item that's sitting there, and it's just a procedural thing of how long it takes the federal government and the state to sign off on it. Now, there is no jeopardy of losing these funds. I'm glad you mentioned some of the economies on the federal level that are being attempted by some of theirs. These monies are obligated, already approved, and appropriated for this purpose. And so it's not that we're worried about funds coming. It's just a matter of following that process. Because we're not the only one that's getting reimbursed for those funds. The last 4 years or so have been significantly different in that the federal funds attached to things like COVID and other activities and storm events has been much larger budget than it was for decades. Any other questions or comments on that?
What's the dollar amount, like, if you estimate we're going to be at, let's just say 24%, what dollar amount would it take to get us at the statutory requirement of 25%?
Well, we would have been well over it with the extra 700,000, but what is that number? Do you know, Laura, off the top of your head?
Yeah, I didn't calculate that for this afternoon, but I think we were, well, last year we were at 28.9%, so that night, that $750,000, somewhere in there, I guess, I don't know, I'd have to, crunch the numbers. But.
Two points to make on that, and I'm glad you asked that. One is our budget went up. So what does that do?
Yeah,
the percentage goes up, the amount to meet that percentage, and that's significant. So it's chasing, that elusive percentage. You can't have the same amount of money and without your percentage dropping. And the other point that I wanted to make, hopefully it didn't fly out of my head, is that this number, the 25% is the minimum. We sometimes get caught up in that. People say you got to have 25%. Well, that's the minimum. That's when you get those letters. Your percentage should be substantially higher so that even if you have $1 million timing snapshot that you didn't get at the exact date you needed it, it's irrelevant if you're at 40% or 35%. It's only relevant when you get down in that 25% range. So another reason to try to beef it up as quickly as you can, but it's not something that you can snap your fingers and it happens overnight. As you deplete the projects that are expending these FEMA dollars that are currently the town's been fortunate enough to receive, that'll take care of a lot of it. But then if you have a hurricane or something, you're right back in that same position again. Anything else? Or if not, we're ready to move on to the next topic. And we're building these as relevant items for you to consider when you get into your details about what you want to do with this particular operating budget, because these factors are very relevant, and I would highly encourage the town to avoid use of those unencumbered fund balance dollars to balance the budget for the next several years so that you achieve your goal.
Any of the commissioners have any other questions for staff on item number 6, fund balance? All right, move on to item number 7 is sales tax distribution. And once again, I'm going to hand that back to our manager to explain.
And this time, I'm going to let Laura go first because this one ties to the next topic closely linked, and I want to bring those together after she reviews this slide with you.
Thank you. So this slide, this table or graph is also in the budget book. This is, I think it's page 27. It's right in that summary section. But it's just a good table that shows our ratio of sales tax and property tax. Property tax represents 41% of our total revenues of our general fund budget. And then sales tax is our second largest revenue, and that's about 19% of our total budget. Sales tax has been growing, which has been fantastic, but it's pretty kind of leveling out. We're looking in our projected figure that it will be a little bit lower than last year's actual. And then we have about a 3% increase in our recommended budget, and that's based on current inflationary numbers and what the state is telling us. And then that middle number there, that 0.49, 0.50, 0.53, that's the ratio. That's sales tax in percent of the property tax. So just a good illustration of both of our major revenues there. And the next, I'm going to jump to the next one. One of the things that we talked about a little bit and we wanted to remind everybody here is how our sales tax is distributed. In Emerald Isle, Currently, well, Carteret County, rather, the yellow highlighted, there's two ways you can have your tax distributed. In fact, there's three. You could have a combination of this, but it's pretty complicated, but the county can choose either population or ad valorem, and Carteret County does ad valorem. And so we're right at 5.43377% of the total pie of Carteret County, and that's the most current report that we've got from the Department of Revenue. And so we talked about it a little bit recently, and we said, you know, if other municipalities within the county and Carteret County, if they do a property tax value, you know, both the value and the rate, their levy is going to go up, and there's a potential for our share of that pie to change, and we may potentially go down. I don't have the history on a graph here, but I just wanted to let the board know and remind, you know, that this could be affected by our neighbors in the county. And if we did go to a population method, then we would be impacted pretty significantly. And so we definitely watch that, and we communicate with our, you know, colleagues in the county and the other municipalities, because that would be significant if we did something like that. You can see the percentage would be 3.92%. So just informational again, and I'll let Randy, you know, comment on it as well, but we just wanted to mention that.
Obviously, on a statewide basis, and with tourism being a primary driver for this area on sales tax, this is something that you do need to keep an mindful eye on the historical patterns and what's going on. I was just reading recently in the newspaper about the prior year tourism numbers were up, but sales tax is fairly flat at best. So that's an interesting dynamic. You don't usually see those two things running counter to each other. But no one obviously has a crystal ball as to what's going to happen on that. The one thing that is known is the method of distribution is hugely important to Emerald Isle, and you can see it really makes a huge difference for all the Bogue Banks towns that have a significant segment of the county's tax values on this island. And Emerald Isle obviously leads that charge. The significance is compounded by this is a choice that's solely at the hands of the county to determine that. Over my tenure in Carteret County and in Morehead City in particular, there was a constant debate among the towns. Periodically it would pop up and it would be the same old debate. Why don't we consider an alternative method of population? Well, obviously, if you look at this and study it, there'd be winners and losers either way. But the one point that this island needs to always emphasize is, one, the huge amount of the county's tax base that is here. Secondly, and very importantly, and critical to this calculation, it's grossly unfair, and I even said this when I was on the opposite side of the argument or discussion when I was representing the largest municipality in the county. It seems unfair that it's based on permanent population, not housing units or any of the other criteria. For example, if you look at it from housing units, there's more housing units, I believe still, it used to be significantly more in Emerald Isle than it would be in the largest municipality population-wise in the county. It just, the math just may not make sense to people, but it's because you have such a seasonal population of second homeowners and other units that are rentals that is congregated on Bogue Banks, and particularly Emerald Isle in that example. And so the town just needs to be very mindful, and of course your incoming manager has been through these discussions and he'll be on top of it. But from a political standpoint, it needs to be a strong policy statement from those municipalities on Bogue Banks that the county not consider it. And one thing that has changed, and I hesitate to say this since we're putting it out there, but I think it's important that you know it. If you look at the one number that has significantly changed during my familiarity with this, as I recall, the county's share of the population has grown significantly over the recent decades. So now, it used to be a no-brainer because the county wasn't going to punish itself to consider the population distribution method. But as you see, this point in time, it shows that they would slightly increase if it went to population. And that's a new dynamic that hasn't been the case very long, and something that everybody needs to be mindful of, although it would have huge detrimental impact. As you can see, if you cut our sales tax, if you look at that first sheet, cut it by 30 to 40%, that's what you're talking about. $800 or more $1,000 swing to just Emerald Isle. Now, granted, you'd see some towns would get a windfall if it went the other way. And Newport's an example, and there's some of the ones, those towns that, some of the mainland towns that have a different dynamic. They don't have the tax base numbers that the Bogue Banks towns do. So it's just, I just want you to be mindful that that really needs to be monitored, and regular discussions on a countywide basis with elected representatives is needed to ensure that somebody doesn't just say, well, we might get a few dollars more if we switch, and that would help these people in my constituency, but it's going to hurt another constituency so severely, and it would be a really hard pill to swallow. I'll stop and see if you've got any questions. I hope I've explained that dynamic adequately to anyone who's listening. I think all of you embrace it and understand it, but I wanted to be sure that was pointed out, that is a bigger concern, in my opinion, than it was 15 years ago or so.
Does this tax on this sheet also represent like the alcohol sales tax with that?
No, it's, I don't believe so. That's
No,
a
it does
separate
not.
one. This is just,
Is that big enough percentage to even?
The ABC board is pretty significant. So the Carteret County ABC revenues that we receive is around 230,000, if I remember the number correctly. So it's a decent distribution that we share in. The beer and wine is pretty insignificant.
but that sales tax, that distribution for alcohol sales, it's not based, is it based on the same formula? I don't think it is.
Oh,
I don't remember.
I don't recall the
I'll
formula.
have to look back. We'll check
one.
that and make sure, but I believe this is, to my knowledge, this is the second largest revenue source, as Laura mentioned, for this town. And it's not uncommon. Most towns it is in North Carolina. So it's very important that we protect that with whatever it takes. So I just encourage you to be aware.
Yep. Stick with our neighbors.
Randy,
It's in all of our interests.
Yeah, it's something just to break it down to the next level too, is roughly it cost us $800,000 is what we're talking about if they were to rotate to a different scenario. Just call it for fat numbers, 800,000. So to keep us in our operating, this is for the public to understand and to reach out to your county commissioners. If you see start going the other way, you need to understand that $800,000 for this town, there's only another way to do it is that's a tax increase for us to make this work here. So it's very important that you voice your concerns at the county level that we need to stay on the current project that we're on right now and not hit Emerald Isle this way. Now, to recover $800,000 in a penny, we always go by pennies. Each penny increase would be how much? Or what's?
It would be a penny and a half probably.
So we're talking if they rotate a penny and a half tax increase just to keep us status quo where we're at right now if we lose this thing. So it's very important to stay on top of this as citizens, to reach out to your county commissioners and state your concerns about this. So I just want to make sure that the public understands this, and it's out of our control. This is a county item here.
It hadn't made the headlines yet, so let's not put it there.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm trying to be diplomatic in how I bring it up.
Yeah, I wouldn't encourage anybody to contact the county
Okay, well,
commissioners
that's
just
fine.
yet.
But do understand, though, that, that $800,000, you know, we run a tight budget here.
Oh, yeah.
$800,000 is going to hurt this town tremendously
It would.
in so many ways,
Yeah, but it's
Very
not bleeding yet.
That's right.
for sure.
Not gone yet.
Yeah.
The other part of the sales tax discussion, though, is significant. The other factor in this, with the ad valorem method in particular, let's assume for now that that's the county's preferred method and it'll stay that way. That still brings up the issue of significant changes by the other parties, as Laura referenced, is impactful for us. So if the county does do what I saw, their recommended budget is, I believe it's slightly less than 2 cents, then that's not far from where we are if you do some of the things we've suggested, for example. And this is what I really hope that the citizens in Emerald Isle will recognize. Cutting the property tax rate to the revenue neutral rate will make us very vulnerable to a significant dip in sales tax, even if they stay with the ad valorem method. I hope everybody follows that, because the lower our rate is, the less our levy is, the lower our percentage of sales tax revenue. Laura's projection is based on the statewide estimates for sales tax revenue overall, but that is just one of the factors. The other key factor is the levy, how our levy compares with our peers. So if, for example, community I managed, if they were to go through with their significant rate increase, if you will, and their ad valorem levy goes up significantly, their share is going to go up. The pie stays the same, if we can put that in your head. The pie stays the same, but how it gets divided is solely based on your levy. So there's incentive to make sure that your rate is competitive in the sense that you don't lose ground on the sales tax share that you are getting from the pie. So I say that not to encourage you to say, oh heck, we might as well stay at 16.5 cents. To me, that would be unreasonable. But if we did, that would have an appreciable impact on our sales tax revenue. I've yet to see a town board do that for that reason, but because the values have changed so dramatically, that would not be prudent and wise. But any discussion about going below what management recommended here, or any slight changes in that, would have implications on the sales tax projection, which means you've got to do more from somewhere else to make the same budget or cut services. And so I just, again, laying the groundwork for the subsequent discussions you may have about where do we land in terms of tax rate. Because after seeing the other communities and the county's budget projections, I don't feel bad about the recommendation, but particularly when you look at another item on the list, when we talk about personnel, I think it has some significance that you look really closely at that to make sure we remain competitive in salaries and other things. Because again, when we made our recommendation based on COLA particularly, and I don't want to jump ahead because we need to stay in line, but that has implications. So we'll bring that up under that discussion. Anything else on the sales tax? Oh, I hope I haven't confused the matter, but.
Would it take legislative action to adjust the equitable distribution on that?
No, it takes county commission.
Just counties.
But the legislatures establish this and they give options. But it's pretty significant, the discussion on the statewide level, but historically counties typically do what's in county's best interest in terms of their budget. But in this case, it's not much difference to the county, as we were saying earlier about talking to people if that discussion comes up. So it could, from their perspective, they would stay pretty much whole either way. What is it? It's less than 1% difference. But it does slightly favor the population version, which is a new dilemma. And so that said, I'm going to stop talking about that and just focus on the state gives you the two options. The county has the sole decision, the County Board of Commissioners, and we can certainly use everything you can do to leverage them in either direction that favors you. But the only other thing we control, we being the town, is the tax rate you set. But you just need to do it with mindset that it has a significant bearing on your second largest revenue source if you lower it significantly.
You know, I wish we could use the occupancy tax more than just for two things. You know, promotion, like we need more promotion, and sand, and which, you know, sand's what brings the dollars in. But man, that's a big chunk of change too.
It sure is.
Somehow we could get just even a fraction of that.
Of course, as you heard, and I'll go ahead and mention this, even though it's just a bit off of this topic, it has relevance to the budget. Commissioner Brownlow and I were in attendance at the Beach Commission meeting that was held here earlier this week, and they pointed out the projections look very favorable in terms of the current funding formula for beach nourishment generating sufficient dollars for the next 50 years, if you can believe it, under the current formula. That is just awesome. I mean, that's an unbelievable report, but it's believable because they've got the data to show it. The beauty of it, I mean, you think of every other revenue source that local governments rely on for anything, and who could project 50 years that it would be anywhere near what it is now? The history of what you just saw for sales tax is what you see. It's like that, and growing numbers. And so for them to project that the current formulas will work decades is really, really very, very positive, because that means you're not going to have that pressure of trying to preserve the cash cow, if you will, of the beach. Some new revenue stream to supplement or rely on state or federal or somebody else to do it. That's the beauty of it. And, unfortunately, we haven't found that kind of formula that funds all our other services, but we'll keep looking. On to the point, the beach nourishment, and part of the reason it will be is it's very narrowly written for its purpose, and has minimal impact on the general fund operating budget for the share for the rest of the properties in the wild other than waterfront properties. But that is a good thing, but it is restricted. You can't use it to offset other municipal expenditures.
And that is legislative.
I was talking to Sam Free about that, and Celeste cares about that too. And they seem to be attentive to the possible ideas and discussion.
Well, the one that jumps out at me is I cannot for the life of me understand why they don't allow it for beach access, which would be helpful to the general fund operating.
Yeah, that
just makes sense to me. You're going to fix the beach and you're not going to make it more accessible. That just seems so. And parking and things that go along with the beach, those amenities, but particularly access. You know, that's to me seems really logical. So maybe that is a possibility that you could get authorization for those kind of things, which wouldn't break the bank or do any great harm to the funding.
For improved beach access, I mean, that brings in, there's still tax increase, it's out of malls from there.
Yep.
And it has a wider spread effect. But that's exactly what we were talking about with, you know, can we just use some for our beach accesses and
maybe that can be done. I hope so. I wish you luck on that. Any other questions or comments? If not, Mr. Mayor or Pro
Yeah.
Tem, we can.
If anybody else got any questions for staff on that one? All right, item number 8 is, I like the way it starts out. This is a discussion of the additional 1 cent capital project funding options. It's broken down into 3 categories. A is Fire Station 2, B is stormwater, and C is street paving. So if we can break up this discussion with item number A to start with is Fire Station number 2, and we can move on from that point.
Okay, just as an intro, we're not trying to set you up, but we planted the seeds, hopefully, firmly in anyone who's paying attention. And the board's already aware that any considerations for fund balance, your sales tax distribution, all of those things need to be somewhere in your head when you're balancing, where are we going to set this tax rate? And the recommendation we made as a minimum is 10.25 cents, which is slightly less than a penny above revenue neutral. That was before we knew some of the things that we've now reviewed. What our peers are doing within the county that has significant impacts on your operating budget and revenue sources like sales tax and so forth. The second part of that is we also have pointed out clearly how limited we are in terms of reserve uses for things like capital outlay, which is one of the bona fide uses that communities accumulate fund balance reserves and unassigned, is to do projects with that, for pay-as-you-go, if you will, on certain capital items. But where we're at with these, and we'll go through them as you just pointed out, Mayor Pro Tem, but the mindset of the community hopefully will recognize that this penny is very important in more than just to fund these projects. It has significant implications on all the other things we've talked about in this meeting. So with that said, we do want to focus on the FEMA funds. If Laura could maybe just review the source of that money for those that are listening, remind people on how much the town was able to secure over the last few years, just rough numbers for various projects and so forth.
So we had 9.8 million, part of the beach excess from FEMA, that was from Florence, part of their Section 428 program, and that's why we call it our FEMA 428 grant. We kind of abbreviate that, but we broke that down into 17 separate projects. Almost all of them are complete. We're really excited about them. And we've got 4, or well, let's see, 1, 2, 3. There are 4 projects left. Let me make sure, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4 Fire Station 2 and stormwater, and that's the ones that we want to talk about a little bit more. They're the construction ones that we're getting towards the end. And there was a little bit more than the 9.87, but that's a little bit more detail. But anyway, I was going to jump into these in a second. So,
all right, the one thing I want to share is I'm really impressed with what she just, one, that the town was in a position and seized the moment and secured that kind of funding for a community of this size. It's almost a year's budget, if you want to look at it that way. And that's huge. And yet, it's not the end-all, be-all. It didn't fix everything. Even as far as you could stretch it. I'm also very impressed that the town completed that high percentage of those projects already. So those are done. This is not revisiting that or reassessing whether you did the right things with the money. I haven't heard any negative on that. What we're talking about now is what's left, how much money is left, and a couple of things have been impactful. One, a period of time has passed, and costs have, we all know what costs have done. And that's what's bringing us to this point, yet there is a reasonable expectation among the community, I believe, among the when you go into these stormwater, these specific areas of town, that they're expecting something to be done because there was funding allocated. This board approved a list of projects for the use of these funds. There's a couple of implications that are important because obviously the normal ritual every year in capital outlay, and we went through it this year, is you decide what you got money for, you decide what you're going to build, and you build it, or you fix it, or you improve it, or you buy it. This is a bit different in that that part has already been done in terms of selecting the projects. You had a budget, but the budget's been blown by inflation to a great extent, or at least that's what we're projecting. Some of them haven't been bid yet, but based on everything we know. The other really unusual part is we've spent money on them, and Laura's going to go over that, what has been spent or obligated already in terms of engineering, design, and those kind of costs that are important, and keeping it on track and moving so that we don't fall into disfavor with the federal and state regulators that are monitoring the use of these funds. They want to see progress continued on this last list. So that's where we're at, and that gives you the context by which we've got to, as the old saying says, fish or cut bait. We've got to do them or make some changes, but there are negative implications if you change. One, you're going to disappoint somebody if you reprioritize or say we're going to do all but one of these. The other part is there's money been spent on them, that she can give you the specifics, and that would mean that the town would have to replace that money from its own resources and use what's left of the federal money on federally approved projects. So I'll stop with that and let Laura give you the numbers.
Yep, and so this is in the slides which you have, and Greg, if you, yep, thank you. So these are estimates. They're still early, but this is the project estimates, I should say. Fire Station 2 is a rebuild, and it is an expansion, and that project was bundled with the other 17, if you will. There's a little complicated explanation of that, but we have $3.2 million available allocated for Fire Station 2. We've spent $39,250 with architects so far. We've gone through a bidding process. We had a construction manager at risk contract that we were looking at, and we were getting some preliminary numbers, and we really felt strongly that we could do a design build methodology a little bit different, not as high architect fees, and we could bring it in a little bit more expensive. But the estimates that we're getting with cost per square foot to build Fire Station 2 as an expanded building is getting close to $5 million. That's everything. That's demolition, rebuild. We have to consider furniture and fixtures, of course, once it's built. So when we looked at that, when we started getting those figures back, we said, uh-oh, we don't have enough grant funds. And so we wanted to bring that forward. We've placed it in the capital improvement plan. And so this slide is just showing, what we think that the town would have to kick in, or we'd have to find other funding sources, or we'd have to do some scope change to the building. And so that's the biggest one, the high priority one, so that's there on top. Then we have our other stormwater projects that we've been working on. Reed Drive also was a kind of scope changing, real challenging project for us, where we got bids. The bids were astronomical, and we said, uh-oh, we got to rethink this. And so our grant, is $325,000 available for Reed Drive. Got the bids back in. We went out and looked at the project and realized that it was not a good design solution. We need to move that water somewhere else. So where the water was going to be deposited was not a good solution. And so the scope has gotten a little bit larger, and when we got some cost estimates back, they said right around that $600,000 all in with engineering and construction. And so again, there's another project that has really kind of gotten over our original grant estimates. So that we said that's going to be about $287,000 more, roughly. And these are, again, rough numbers. We've
How much
already,
have- how
we've
much have
already
we spent
spent
on
on
that?
Reed Drive, yep, we have already spent, and so we've spent just under $113,000, and that's both engineering and material. So we have material on hand, we have pipe, we have a pump to get it, a lift station, if you will. So we've invested in that already, and we just need to kind of get it across the goal line. Similarly, Cedar Street, that was a smaller project. We thought that was going to be, I think, a berm to start with. It was, a much smaller project, and we had a lot of challenges with design and with easements. And so the original grant was fairly small because we thought it was going to be small, and then that scope changed. And so we've invested $42,728 in part of that engineering design. And internally, we've come up with a rough estimate that we think it's another $100,000 to build it, construct it, concrete. It would be a dune, or not a dune infiltration, but a infiltration under the right-of-way is what they want to do there. So we would need additional funds, so you see that tally on the right-hand side. And last but not least is the Lands End Dune Infiltration Project. Again, I think that's both scope and design. We started out with a smaller number. The grant available is $735,836. That's what's left in there. And the engineering estimate that came back from our engineers was over $1 million. And again, we went, so we have smaller grant dollars. The good news is we have a significant grant, the proportion on the grant funds is, there we have, more grants than we do on the town side, but that would mean that we would need to kick in some money to complete that project as designed. And so, Lands End, we have $109,900 spent on the engineering and design of that project.
All told, it's over 300,000 that we've invested.
Yes, the grand total of the spending that we've committed with the design effort, and that we've actually claimed it and been reimbursed for it from FEMA as well. They've been, as those bills have come in, we've got those reimbursed.
What type of grants are you applying for on these?
Just strictly on this is just the FEMA, so we have not gone and applied for secondary grants, like a supplementary.
These
grants.
are available, you've already been approved for.
They're already awarded. Mhm.
If you go forward with the projects, they're solidly there. And Laura's indications from the granting agencies, as long as we keep making progress, but we're at a critical stage. And we've got a couple of recommendations on that we want to share. One of them will be coming up at your June meeting if we can get all the paperwork right regarding the fire station. But at this point, maybe we ought to stop and just see, are there burning questions or on what we just went through in terms of the dynamics of these projects that are left, and what you're more familiar with the history of them than I am, of how they got to this point, but we'll stop.
Well, that's, being that Emerald Isle is entirely bordered by outstanding resource waters, it seems like we should be eligible for some of the clean water and conservation grant money to do some of the stormwater projects.
It might be an option, and I don't know, but the problem, if you delay it a long time to apply for another grant that may or may not come 6 to 12 months, I don't know if that's going to put in jeopardy bird in hand money you have for those projects. It may be, I would suggest you focus those efforts on other stormwater needs that aren't going to be funded from these federal dollars, and make your priorities known and go after the state monies to fill those voids and not disrupt this process and put in jeopardy the $3-4 million you already have.
Combining Clean Water Management Trust Fund grants with other federally funded projects is tricky at best.
It's a lot of oversight. It's a whole lot of oversight.
What about funding over longer terms of financing?
Oh, no, well, we'll get to that one. You hit it. That's the one alternative to meet this need. We don't have it. And we've told you we don't have it in fund balance. So you got to come up with it one way. You can do part of it through a penny, but I don't think they're going to wait 5 years to fund it with a penny a year. So really the only logical conclusion here is to look at funding it otherwise. And we're going to make a recommendation for you to consider on that. Any other questions?
I had a related question on
Yes, sir.
the third column, the funds that are needed. What's the timing on that? Is that a 12-month horizon? Is that starting July 1st or towards the end of the fiscal? How does that break down over time?
Fire
Ish.
Station 2, did we say next year? It was a 12-month, wasn't it, Billy?
The goal was to try to break ground in spring of 26.
I think
Right-
it was.
Right, Chief? Is that what we were looking?
Sorry.
We could get LGC approval on any additional funding and the plans development. If you want to hit that, go ahead.
Yeah, so through permitting, site work, obviously going down with what FEMA requires as far as site disturbance, getting that approval. Sorry about that. We would look at breaking ground April of 2026, which obviously plays into play as far as hurricane season. And so they did say that would be a 12-month from start to completion with one firm. And so we've had talks with a couple different firms, and manager Randy Martin spoke about it as far as we've had some time over this. We did have a contractor. We did go out for a bid process. That contractor, we were unable to get the contract correct, and Laura and I worked for almost 4 months, I guess, trying to get that insurance right, so the league and us as a municipality are covered in case something happened. Unfortunately, we had to withdraw from that contract and then start the process to the next best contractor, which we've gotten all the great stuff out of them as far as the insurance and the contracts covering the town, covering us as a municipality. So that's where we're currently setting with that.
Thank you.
And that said, so going to your point, the dollars in total wouldn't be needed for at least a year for most of this, because you got the grant funds you can pull on in the meantime. But obviously, you got to have in place by next year where you're going to come up with the rest of the money before you let the contract. So that gives you that timing. In terms of the stormwater, between Joe and Laura, if they could comment on those.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the Land's End is because it is a dune infiltration, we're going to the dune. We would have to do that in the wintertime. We'd have to work around the turtle nesting season. So that was something that the engineers we were kind of guiding us and helping us, making sure we bid that. That would be a winter project. But I think construction for all 3 stormwater projects would not, once they're under construction, I don't think they would take more than 12 months. I think, they'd be fairly quick. If I remember, even the Dune one, I feel like was fairly quick. I apologize, I don't have those timelines.
Oh,
but
that's fine.
Joe, you
the
want to
building
add
was
anything?
probably the longer one.
Laura, when was this, the grant money, what was the initial date on this, when it was initially awarded? Do you remember by chance?
They were 2023
2023?
was on the fire station, yeah. I do have that in my notes back at the office.
That's something to think about. So 2023 grant fund was 3.2, and in that short period of time, we've increased to 1.5. So that kind of tells you time is of the essence. And wait another 2 years, we're going to be at what the original cost was on it.
Good point.
Double.
That's what they're trying to tell us.
Yeah. So just to understand that.
And what we did do in the budget, the recommended budget is we placed these numbers in there and then we assumed a borrowing, and that's in the 5-year plan. So it didn't affect the 2026 budget directly, but we went ahead and placed it in that 5-year forecast as if that we were going to borrow for these. So, and then we wanted to talk through it tonight. So.
Joe, you have any comments on the timing further than what was mentioned?
No, I agree with Laura. Each project should take at least 12 months, I think, to complete once they start. It's like Laura said, though, it's just every time we get a quote, or it's just, they're like astronomical, so.
Sticker shock at times.
Yeah, sticker shock at times, so.
And my last question, these 3 add up to what's letter B here under 8B for stormwater. Are there any other stormwater projects that we would think about in the terms of the budget and the capital and the discussion we're having, the one?
Like it's Cape Emerald,
Well, none of the others are scheduled for FEMA funding, but Joe, you might want to comment in the
Cape
five-year
Emerald,
plan.
is working, and that, I think we're still held up on an easement for one of the properties. They won't give the easement to set the new pipe. I believe that money got allocated for something else, correct, Laura?
Yep.
That was there?
That's right. That's right.
So we'd
So we
have
don't have Cape Emerald in the capital improvement plan.
Yep.
That is not in there at the moment.
At this time.
Yeah,
At this time. So the only other large project is the Western Emerald Isle Stormwater Infiltration Project. That is also FEMA money, and it's a COVID obligation that the state recommended us, and it's in review, and they asked us a few questions. It's still active, surprisingly. It's a lengthy process, and we asked about it recently, and they said, just keep, hang on, keep waiting. So it hasn't been de-obligated. It's still there. We're still in the,
What was the scale on that? Was it a couple million?
yes, that we had it was close to 3 million, if I remember correctly. And then that project, Commissioner Brownlow, we did go ahead and put a matching Clean Water Trust hope for that, because that would have a match required. It wasn't 100% grant funded through the FEMA COVID monies. And so, but that's further down the line too. So I don't have a borrowing for that. That's gonna, once we get awarded, we'll probably be working hard to figure out how to get that match and see if we can get that.
My guess is you'll be dealing with these for the next 3 to 4 years, probably, and that one in particular. But we are encouraged that at least it didn't go away and dry up on the vine. It is money, and they still have it.
Yeah, the last communication we got is they were gonna look at an environmental assessment for that, and then we haven't heard any feedback. So we get a little information, and then we're just kind of in a waiting pattern.
So just looking at that, and it's a very good point, the other major ones, one potentially has grant, hopefully would be the vast majority, if not all of that one. The smaller one, if you can overcome this additional easement, I don't remember the pricing on that scale. Do you?
I don't remember that one.
Cape Emerald was,
It was over 100,000.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a much smaller project, is what I was remembering.
Yeah.
So that's feasible. You could fund that through an annual appropriation process, potentially.
And if you can't secure the easement, I was talking to them, they showed me the wetland retention area, and with today's relaxed federal laws on wetlands, what constitutes a wetland, if it's an isolated, like a forest or hardwood bottom wetland type, we might could excavate it and increase the capacity so it won't flood over. I know the last rain event, I was getting sent photos of it about to breach over.
That's a good example. If you were to say, well, we're not going to be able to do all these, you're going to really catch it, in my opinion, from whoever is the short straw in that. So, because you got others that are waiting. So, and these are pretty significant projects. They're not, budget busters necessarily, particularly the Cedar Street one, but there's a significant expectation that you're going to do these projects, and they're important. They're important to our island, that you address these stormwater concerns when you have the opportunity. And these opportunities don't come very often to pop up this kind of money and fix something in collaboration with the neighborhoods that are affected. Any other comments on this? If not, we can talk about how you could pay for it.
I had just one comment, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm looking at Joe to make sure, but I think if the Land's End dune infiltration is complete, that will also alleviate some of that water from going to Cape Emerald. So I
Yes.
think that will be a win for the Cape Emerald, just
Good
for me to
point.
buy some time as well, so,
That is correct.
thanks.
No other questions for Joe on this topic? We've set the stage again for you on how we could go forward with this if you, we can talk about paying for it, but you want to move on?
Yep.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, we would recommend you go to the financing options.
Yes, sir. Let's please continue the conversation and move on to how we can reached. Right now, we've got 4.3 million of funds available, and we need to figure out a way to get to the 2.5 that's needed to make it happen.
But before we leave that, I apologize, backtrack just a bit. Just to make sure you're aware, the Chief's still here, if we need to elaborate on this. Having looked at the options available and to try to get as close to the budget as possible, as Laura referenced, I recommend that the town rebid, I recommended it, the procurement process for the services to do this project. I talked about it with Frank, got his input. The town, we can review the history of how we got where we're at, but currently the big difference is we were coming to the board with two contracts, a contract for an architect for that project and a contract for a builder. And I do not believe that to be in the town's best interest. Frank, after he listened to my comments, I'm not going to speak for him, but I think he certainly understood where I was at. Particularly, he mentioned having a relationship with an architect who's in Maryland for a project in Emerald Isle that's not cheap. And they may be the greatest architectural firm in the country, but I believe there's comparable level of service in this region. And Frank was very concerned about that aspect. We discussed it, and Laura and I and the chief have met. We have attempted to negotiate the pricing of those two separate contracts, but it doesn't gain us a whole lot. Is that a fair statement, Chief? You want to comment on that?
That is correct. So we attempted to negotiate roughly the architectural fee was $550,000, just as a ballpark number. We were able to get that down to $275,000. However, in looking at the services rendered by the architect and what the contractor was going to require as far as structural engineering, that service fee he left out, and so that went back up, and that put us back closer to around $375,000 just for the architectural work. In discussion with Manager Martin, Laura, and felt that that design build was a better process to go after. Had a lot of familiarity with previous experiences in building structures from Randy. And so we worked this past Friday to get the RFP hemmed up for bid and got that out on the site. And we do currently have two contractors that will have bids back to us by the deadline. So I do know that. And I'm working to get the third one because I know Laura's looking at me like three. So I'm working hard to get that pushed out again, but it's also posted on the state site as well.
Yeah, because we don't want to delay because FEMA requires three, so we got to get that. But the bottom line is, it seems like it's a delay, but to me, it only makes good sense that we go this route. And the key difference would be is the builder will have built into their contract the design element. We're contracting with one entity. And people have argued, I've heard it all over the years, and I was very reluctant to go down this path years ago because some people would argue the fox is in the hen house, but I don't see it that way now, having gone through this experience, because the builder has a budget and they have to perform within that budget. There aren't any change orders, there are no major surprises, and it's a much tighter build. So when you award with that design build contractor, they are obligated to manage the project and get it within budget. And so I think this is the best route to go for this project. I think it'll give you as good a product at less cost. And timing-wise, it won't make any significant difference, since if you go with what we're getting ready to discuss, you're going to have to go to the local government commission for approval for borrowing. By the time that's done, which we anticipate would be before the end of the year, if you stay on this path. But to accomplish this, what we've done is put out a new RFP. The first one was done for the other option that Laura mentioned, and this one would be for design build. And we would have on your agenda in June, if we get enough bids, proposals, for you to authorize a contract with one of the preferred vendor. And we've been very impressed with the one that was selected and negotiated with at this point, but they're going to have their pencil sharp enough to be still in the running. And we will look forward to putting that on your agenda if we get all the requisite proposals, and you would have the opportunity to award that contract and go forward and get a very competitive project, because they're doing them all over eastern North Carolina and other parts of the state, and they're telling us the budget numbers, and it could be what we projected in here. That's what our hope is. Any questions or comments on that before we leave it? Just wanted to prep you for that June meeting, but that'll be there.
I appreciate all the work you guys putting into that, and Chief, the work you're doing on that to be efficient, but yet, meet the needs of the town and the community also. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, now, how to pay for it.
Yep, one more slide, please, Greg. Slideshow, thank you. Thanks. So some financing options. These are just some rough figures, but if we bundled those projects, and we did go out for borrowing for the station, and we added in the stormwater, some of the banks, we're hearing from both the LGC and also our local Truist Bank, they're preferring the shorter terms. They want to have like a 10 to 12 year, maybe a 15 is what we're hearing. But I saw a fire station for 20 year. So we looked at some figures. The town recently, not so long ago, got our brush truck at 4.75%. That's tax exempt borrowing. And that's a 5 year. I saw the 20 year for just this past month with a bank borrowing for a fire station in Lillington, and it was 4.66%. So we went ahead and used 5% for illustration purposes. And then you just have those numbers. If you did a 20 year, your annual debt service would be just about $202,000 for our budget. And then if we went to shorter terms, it's a little bit more expensive, $242,000 at a 15 year, or if we shortened it up for a 10 year solution and paid that off in 10 years, we'd be looking at $326,000 in our annual budget to pay that project investment off. So those are the options. And in our 5 year planning, we did a 20 year, and a little bit, I went aggressive, I went 4% in this book, but again, it's just the best guesstimate for future planning. But that's what we would be maybe looking at for our current year budget.
And on just the prognosis side of it, obviously, we don't know what rates are going to do, but there are serious discussions on the federal level. You've all heard these, I'm sure, of maybe 2.25% drops before the end of the year. And by the timing working on this, if you get into process and go through approvals and follow the schedule we just reviewed, it could be that you're looking closer to 4%, which obviously would be really good news. As Laura said, a couple of examples of other projects of late, eastern North Carolina, particularly Nags Heads, was 4.3. So I think it's reasonable to think you could get in that range with this project. The biggest decision you're going to have to make as time goes on, you don't have to make it tonight, is scope. What are we going to include in this? Because I've heard comments. I certainly would highly recommend, even though these are still projections, we hope high projections, you might get less than $2.5 million once you bid it and you go through this economy that we anticipate with this design build on the fire station, and looking at that project in close detail. But if you stick with a $2.5 million borrowing, to make sure that these priorities are done, where federal grant dollars are there to match, and you don't put in jeopardy any of those dollars. The other thing that pops in my head, though, if you're going to use a penny on the tax rate, obviously that generates more than 2.5 million in terms of a debt service payment. If you use those dollars, it's closer to $600,000. So under any of these scenarios, I think you're going to use half or less of that new revenue source if you approve that penny towards it. The other one that strikes me and is to look at other projects, and the one that really stands out to me is the street project, doing something for your streets to get closer. And I don't want to steal the thunder on that until we get to that item on the agenda. So unless there's more questions on this, and now that we put this borrowing concept out there, we'd like to transition to the Powell bill discussion for street improvements, if you're ready.
My only reservation about the longer-term financing is the longer we put it out there, and with our lower reserve balance on the general fund, is the chance for that inevitable storm that's going to hit, and then we're going to need those extra funds and incur more debt with that, likely.
Of course, you do have every year, you'll be reviewing your budget and you'll be reviewing your tax rate, and you have other ways to address that. But what we try to focus on is the one penny concept. If you look at that for capital, what could you get done on it? And that's why we're presenting it this way, just as a concept. But it's a good point. You're going to have a bunch of variables like that you've got to be sensitive to. All right, if you're ready, then we'll talk about the Powell bill. That is our only dedicated source of revenue for street work. It's earmarked. You have to use it for that. We're not going to go into the statewide implications for how that money is calculated in great depth, but it is important to realize that, one, that is never going to pay for all your street improvement needs. It may be all your spending, and the town has traditionally not supplemented that money in a significant way for streets, and associated expenditures. But it is a dedicated source, and Laura's going to go through what's available currently for this fiscal year and the formula. But it's very obvious that formula, next we'll talk about the need in greater detail. I know you talked about this in January, but just for relevance at this discussion, I think we've had Joe's gone back and updated their numbers, and we've got a handout for you tonight that they're on that. So if we could just review the Powell bill, Laura.
Sure thing. So I have a slide for this too. And just before I get into Powell bill, quick comment on the debt. I wanted to, on page 135 in the book too, before I get too far. One good thing is to remember is we will be paying off some of our old debt. So for example, McLeansville Park will be paid off in 2028. So just if we do look at terms and adding that new debt on, we do have some of those old debts that will be falling off. So I just wanted to mention that, and that's also illustrated on page 135.
And one footnote to that goes to your question, Commissioner Brownlow, or your comment, is the shorter term obviously is preferable in a number of ways. One, it's less of a longer term commitment that the board is making to this funding that you're setting aside. And it also frees it up in a more reasonable time so you can do something else. And so, I would encourage you to have it as short a term as you can. And if the rates go down, then obviously for similar money, you can have a shorter term. But 10 to 15 years would be preferable. 10 would be ideal. I wouldn't go any less than 10 without overburdening the budget and creating other problems. But if you could get a 10, 12, 15-year deal and shy away from longer term like 20 years, since you're going to bundle these, I like that term Laura used, if you go this route, because fortunately, we've got enough grant funding, you don't have to do it all on the fire station. So anyway, go ahead.
And then Powell bill, we budgeted 196,271. That's the same as 2025, and that was based on history and also some feedback from the state, and we felt like that was a safe budget. Currently, we have roughly 69,000 in unspent Powell bill. We're able to carry over any unspent Powell bill for several years, so you can accumulate that and do larger projects in a second year, for example, or a third year. So in 2026, we should have, if we get that one, if it comes true and we get that 196 from the state, we could have about $265,000 next year to do a little bit more mileage. And, we talked about needing those pavements and maybe also maybe doing a little bit bigger job to leverage and get economy of scale. So that's just an update on the streets. I don't have another slide on the specific streets, but we went ahead and did some handouts. I know this is from our budget workshop, but I just wanted to give you a fresh copy, and I think Joe updated it as well because we just did a little bit of street paving very recently. So the red ones in that listing, the red highlighted streets would be the 2026 that we would go through to tackle. And I might need you to help me on that one, Joe, if any specific questions come up on the streets.
That's if you limit your budget allocation for the coming year to what's available on the sheet. My thought, and then Joe can talk about the scope of it, is if you scope a bigger project, I think you'll attract more competitive bidding and you will get more bang for your buck, particularly if rates are low, if you go ahead and borrow a chunk of money to do something that's more fitting and maybe makes a bigger dent in the voluminous future expenses that you're going to need to update your streets projected based on the engineer's input and Joe's expertise and his staff. With that intro, Joe, you want to comment a little bit about it?
So Mr. Myron's correct there. I believe if we have a bigger scope, then we can reach out to more asphalt companies, and then the larger amount you have, I could be wrong, but I believe then your pricing of asphalt seems to come down a little bit more because they're bringing in more and stuff like that, so you kind of get a better pricing on the asphalt and stuff. And then you kind of want to try to keep everything localized too, because they will charge us to demobilize and mobilization and move from one place to another. So those are things to consider also.
I think the other thing about the materials, the price goes up and down kind of relative to the gas prices that you see at the pump. And it's a little bit cheaper now than it was back in January. And the way those go up and down, I think the asphalt prices lag a couple of months behind or a month behind, something like that. But there's a lot of variables in place that's hard to guess. But the one thing that always seems to hold up is the bigger the job, the cheaper you get it per foot or mile or however you measure it.
Yes.
How much does it cost to pave, like, is it by the foot?
Some of the estimates we got, low estimate was maybe possibly like $50 per linear foot, medium would be 80, and then the high estimate was $75. I know when we go, we get just a ton and all that, that usually charges like $95 a ton. So, but if you go by, like you said, like the more you go, the cheaper I believe the price will be, the more footage and mileage.
So you might could even beat that $50 a linear foot if you do a scale. And to me, what jumps out at me, and you don't have to, again, finalize this, but it's all just the mindset. If you can package a deal to go to the LGC and have enough money in it added to the 2.5 or whatever that number ends up being to do those projects with the FEMA funds that you're obligated to do, I'd feel the void to look at least at a $3 million venture. If you do at least $3 million, then you conceptually would free up another $500,000 to go with the 200 and do a $700,000 to $800,000 project. I think that's a good target. If you can do $1 million, that's even better. But the architect, the engineer had projected if you dedicated, a low recommendation was $800,000 a year towards it. Well, I don't think that's feasible for the town to do that every year. But we're not catching up and we're getting further behind. But if you took a whack at $1 million investment in your streets over the next 12 months, timed in with the approval of the LGC of the borrowing and other, you actually can get approval where you can go ahead and front the money if you wanted to do this project sooner than later. If the bidding climate looked good or whatever, you could actually get started on it, I believe, before you had all these other projects under construction. And so that would be good because you might could get moving on the streets and time it. I don't know, a scale project like that, Joe, are you talking fall or spring would be preferable?
If something was that big, I would shoot for more towards the fall.
Okay.
That way, we get enough time to get it done. And
So fall of '26, if you couldn't get it together for this fall, you maybe can, I don't know. You think that's feasible? You could bid it for this fall?
possibly, yeah.
So anyway, that'll be up to the board, how much you're willing to go in terms of pushing that. But that, to me, would be a priority that I think the town ought to seriously consider, given the rest of you're going to be doing the borrowing anyway. And if the terms are right and so forth, I think the town would be wise to look at $800,000 to $1 million project with 200 or so of it coming out of the Powell bill monies you've allocated. And that's another piece of that penny, if you keep tabs, that you'd be using as that portion of the debt service. Make sense? Okay.
I haven't heard too many people complaining when their streets get paved.
Now, there's more of the ones that don't get paid.
Yeah, so,
Or
yeah.
haven't yet.
Tell them that we're gonna be doing some big paving and they get happy.
Well, and you know, when you're doing, what was the mileage this year, Joe? That we did? I know it was less than a mile, but.
Yeah, it was
More like
just,
yardage.
it was,
It was
I
little.
believe it's just under a mile or just
Just
over.
under a mile, and that was how much roughly?
That was,
It was 166,000.
yeah,
All right, she remembers.
say two.
All right,
Yeah.
so put that in perspective. If you do $1 million project, obviously, and particularly if you get the economies of scale on the materials and the competitiveness of the bids, you could do several miles, obviously.
Yes.
Conceivably, in 1 year. And then you work on the next year, how you're going to cobble together. Because that, as Laura mentioned, in '28, you'll free up some money that you could maybe not borrow again, but you would supplement your Powell bill. Anytime the town can supplement the Powell bill expenditures annually, I highly recommend it because it's hard to do. And you're never going to catch up. You're just getting further behind if you don't. Okay? All right.
Two final slides. So this slide we've been using in the workshops quite a bit, but the tax value that we used is the 5.9 billion, that's in our budget currently. And I just put these two figures in the middle there, and you can see a penny, normally with 100% collection rate, we would collect 590,000, so we have a slight decrease because we are obliged by law, we can't budget more than our collection rate. So we can assume safely that if we were to adopt a penny, we should be able to put 586,000 in our budget and then use it for hopefully some of these projects that we just talked about. But we divided it out a few different ways. You know, what's a half a penny? What's 3/4 of a penny? What's a quarter of a penny? So a quarter of a penny is 146,000 if you just divide that out. And those were just big, easy numbers that we wanted to show the board. And then again, I kept this on there from our last budget workshop, and I think it might be a forever statement that we probably will always be one of the lowest rates among the general funds amongst beach towns. So that's still a good thing. And so I like to still have that there. So I know you've all seen that. And I went ahead and updated this. This is the slide. This was the question that came up last board meeting, but I went ahead and added in 2024. So before the valuation, that's out of our budget book, last year's budget book, our adopted 2025 budget. So last year, a total average tax bill was $969,000. I said thousand. I must be getting tired. Please delete that. $969, and then and that assessed value at that time was $405,000. The per month amount is just about $81 a month. Average tax bill at 10.25 cents would be a monthly bill of just under $93. If we went and adopted this penny that we've been discussing to 11.25 cents, that average tax bill per month would be $99. And then Randy asked today, you know, what if we did put another quarter in there? What if it was 11.5? It would be right about $100 even. So just wanted to mention that and you know, revisit that slide again, and we do have a hard copy of that as well.
Okay, with those things in mind, then I think that's a perfect segue to the next item on the agenda, which is the major asset that the town has, and that's its personnel. And I think obviously this budget projected the need and funded or recommended funding to further invest in our personnel and try to not lose any ground in terms of competitiveness and so forth. I still stand by. I believe this is a good budget recommendation. I appreciated all the positive comments we received from commission and others related to this budget. But I do think more work could be done in the area of personnel, and particularly having now seen, like we talked about, the tax rate and so forth, what our peers are doing countywide and the competitiveness and how we're, to some degree, if you look at resignations and patterns that the clerk and finance, HR director and I have looked at. She updated me on that. When you look at what we're facing right now in terms of recruitment and retention, more work can be done and should be done. It's a matter of whether you do it in this budget or not. Relative to that, also want to bring into this discussion, and the chief has prepared a report that updates some of the information you received at your January workshop relative to the new positions that are recommended in fire EMS to meet our obligations there and make sure that the department is adequately funded and adequately staffed to meet the requirements of national fire protection review and others. So I don't know which order you want to go in. I'd maybe suggest we address the fire, because I know some of you relayed to me, you had some questions. Just wanted the public to better understand what is being accomplished with that. So I'd suggest we maybe have the chief do that first, if that's agreeable. And what it's not, because some people, I think, maybe misconstrued this, that this is solely based on what we're doing on Coast Guard Road. And I'd like the chief to update you real quickly on that. I've tried to keep the board informed of the progress, but I think you've got some very current information on that. So, but it is not solely based on the needs on Coast Guard Road and the expansion of some of the service there.
Thank you, sir. So, yeah, just the question, I guess is in my mind is that just to address the response and our service levels to our citizens there along Coast Guard Road, while the primary, when we look at, our response times and are we providing this service to all of our citizens across the 12 miles, is everybody getting the same level of service as far as professionalism and skills? When I sit down at the end of each month and I derive out the response times and been able to derive out, more segmented response times to see where we were getting slower at. In Station 1's response time, initial time, was getting slower. However, secondarily, that request for personnel would be the 3 firefighter EMTs with a permanent position of a part-time person. So it is a ask for 2 positions, 3 full-timers. We supplement the 1 position as a part-time basis, so we don't have the benefits. It's a little bit more cost-effective for us. And so we can provide that 3rd ambulance and that same level of service. As you remember, in January, we had the 900 transports for EMS. And so we're tracking those numbers. And when we get into this slideshow here, we've been able to kind of pull a little bit more information, because I know in January we only had about 4 months of this data with the new RMS system that we had. But I was kind of surprised. I actually tallied it in the April narrative for the end of month reports. And so I was surprised to see the level of calls that we had to the Coast Guard section of Emerald Isle. However, on the secondary aspect of that, by providing those 2 positions on Emerald Isle, when we do have an ambulance that is transporting a patient to the hospital, you got to think that's about an hour and 45 minutes on a good day. From the time the call goes out to the time we have a 20-minute or less on-scene time to a transport time of 30 minutes. Hopefully the hospital has a bed and we can pass off patient care to the hospital, 30-minute return trip back to Emerald Isle. So you're looking at about an hour and 45 minutes before we can get those 2 personnel back here, because we have a responsibility to provide patient care to that patient. By providing those 2 positions, we also provide service level that was going to either maintain on the EMS side of things or in the event of a fire. Okay, so when we look at a fire, we can't go into a burning building with just 1 person. Okay, we have to have a certain level, and what Randy was discussing was an NFPA, and so we're required to get a certain level of personnel on scene within a time frame. And so the state, when they come to, I call it an audit, it's our report card. When they come, they look at that, and when we get into the slideshow, we'll talk about that some more. But we provide those 2 additional personnel here. While most fire departments traditionally would try to just add a personnel to a fire engine. Okay, we do get a level of service, but we don't get a level of service. With what this ask is we are getting an additional level of service, which would be a 3rd ambulance at that Coast Guard station to provide the level of service in EMS calls, which is a driving factor for us. Okay, nobody here can stop, EMS calls from occurring. Unfortunately, we can't schedule them. So by doing that, we are gaining a level of service to that area, and we're providing a quicker response to that area, to those citizens. I hope that answers that opening question. That was in my mind. Thank you. So some of this stuff is from the January meeting, and I talked about those interesting data metrics that we've been able to gain over these past couple months. So we'll talk about the operations and the future safety issues. This was a slide, as you see there, that blue column, the 937 is the EMS incidents with a 584 transported, total of 1,573 calls for service. Okay, that goes from EMS transports, fire calls, vehicle accidents, extrication, lift assists. We get the calls to, hey, we didn't get a beach house with an elevator, and we can't get our groceries upstairs. Smoke alarm changed out. That has all that stuff wrapped into it, okay? So catch-all, that's that yellow bar that you see there. Talked about the additional services that we do provide. On top of the personnel that we currently have, we have 454 commercial fire inspections that are occurring annually. We had 16 cardiac arrests in 2024 with a 20% ROS, which is something that we shoot for. Obviously, you see there the national average is 30%. So working to get that number up and providing a quicker response time would assist with those numbers as well. As far as the ocean is concerned, I hope it slows down a little bit from last weekend, but 165 people pulled from the ocean here along Emerald Isle in the 24 season. So you may recall this is a heat map. This is updated. This does go from October 1 to Sunday. So try to round that out. Just showing you where our calls are most coming in from. So when we look at this, we're seeing everywhere, you know, because everybody loves to come to the beach. But it's surprising to me because we're talking about May 18th. All right. I remember when I came here in 2004, you could stand out on Emerald Drive and probably not see a car for a couple hours in the wintertime. Okay. It was just the way it was. However, when we're talking about our off season, because we're just at the end of our peak season or shoulder season in October, January, February, March, April, still maintaining pretty busy. As you see there from that time frame, we had 750 incidents as of Sunday from October 1st. These are the metrics, the surprising part that I spoke about. So this is based off of primary response zone. So when our crews go out on a call based off the address, when they come back to do their report, they select the primary district. So it's based off an address. If it's off Coast Guard Road, the primary response district is labeled as Coast Guard Road, which covers Emerald Drive to the point. Out of those calls that we just talked about, 419 of those came from Station 1's primary district, which is our 6400 block right up here by Whitewater, all the way to the base of the bridge. As far as Coast Guard Road, that, again, I spoke about that. And then Station 2 is the 6300 block, all the way to our east line. When we look at those calls between October 1st to May 18th, I was very shocked to see that it was only 10 incidences off compared to Station 2's district and the Coast Guard Road district. So I see Commissioner Taylor looking at me. This is going into our ESTF stuff, and Commissioner Sanderson, I know, briefed on it in February, but our calls for service, when we start breaking this down, if we add that 9-minute response time to that 4-minute response time at Station 1, I feel my primary job is that level of service, and I have to decipher out why are we slow. Okay, so we look at turnout time. How quickly are we getting out of the station? All right, that's good. If it's not, we speak with the captains, we get on it. Then we look at the traffic levels. Well, traffic levels in Station 1's district is pretty good, not too bad. But when we were able to break out the Coast Guard Road response times, that's when we really started seeing that eye catcher. And so that was surprising to me that, again, only 10 incidents off from October 1st to May 18th. Old data, and hopefully we'll be able to get some new data, but this is showing our permanent population. Now it's a couple of years old, 2021, I believe it does say up there, yep. And so we see that permanent resident for our taxpayers here along Emerald Isle, we do have a large portion down Coast Guard Road area. I spoke of the audit or the report card. In 2021, no, I'm not proud of this, but I will tell you where the downfalls, where we got dinged on. We had a training detriment in 2021. We have worked over the past several years to recourse that and bring it back up, and we are very proud of that. And so our deployment analysis would be our response time back in 2021 was an issue with when the state came in to look at our response, and then company personnel. Now, 2021 was prior to the merge of fire and EMS, which at the time, both the fire department and our EMS department were asking for additional personnel. And we do expect a new audit or report card in 2026. That's with North Carolina Office of State Fire Marshals coming in, which does have an effect on our fire insurance rating, both commercial and residential. The NFPA 1710 that you see there is where it requires us to have a certain amount of personnel, and you can see that tracked out, excuse me, on scene within 4 minutes. The number of personnel we need to have on scene within 8 minutes to mitigate that fire incident. So that's where we derive some of that. And instead of saying, well, this is all on just the fire aspect. Again, going back to, we would add a third EMS ALS truck that we do already have currently in our level of service, which would also allow us to have 2 additional firefighters or fire responders in the event of a fire emergency. So when we talk about, I spoke about the hour and 45-minute turnaround time. Depending on the hospital that we go to, it could be 2 hours, it could be longer than that. This is data that we were able to see that we had overlapping calls. So when I speak of, we had 2 people off the island, or we had 4 people off the island. If we have 2 EMS calls right now, minus myself and Deputy Chief Coffey in the room, we only have 4 fire and EMS personnel on this island. So, and they're at 2 different stations. So we have 2 at Station 1, 2 at Station 2. The number of calls that we actually have overlapping from October was 209 incidents. So where we were not adequately staffed to meet that 1710 marker. The highest number that we had was 7 incidents overlapping, and that was, for the wintertime, that was a lot. But obviously, in some of those instances, we have to depend on our mutual aid departments with Western Carteret and Indian Beach. So, just those slides that you saw in January. That is, I know the salaries, am I going into that yet? Yep. The salaries was in the January budget retreat slide, similar to that one there. But we were, out of the 5 departments that were listed there, we were the lowest paying as far as when it comes to paramedic firefighters. And so with us running over 900 EMS calls, instead of coming to y'all and asking the entire fire department needs this, pulling out what we're running, the service calls that we do run, and we're providing the service level to our citizens, and asking for that paramedic adjustment. And that's what you're seeing there, is that a paramedic adjustment in that salary ask, so we can stay competitive. We, out of the 5 departments, Morehead City, Western Carteret are ahead of us in the overall EMS calls that they answer. Obviously, Morehead City is really close to the hospital, and it can turn around those calls really quickly. And that is a $10,000 difference in pay between the 2 departments. This ask would put us in that 3rd place rather than that last place. So that's how I gauge that ask in this budget preparation.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions for the chief?
I had a question about this standard. I think I heard you, obviously, the more people, the lower the response time, or you make it possible to have lower response times at least. And it probably helps morale and work life and everything else to have more people available. What are the other things? Did you mention something about fire insurance? Would that go necessarily up or down whether you pass or don't pass this audit, or what's that relationship?
So yeah, those 3 things that in 2021 that we got dinged on. I say dinged, I apologize, but that we got a pretty bad mark on. Okay, I call it black eyes, and I have no problem talking about them because I was a part of the department. But the deployment analysis, 1, and then the company personnel, those 2 numbers would, we would get more points. I'm trying to say this in the right way. So we would get more points towards our rating. We're currently at a 3 insurance rating. We missed a 2. It was almost by just less than a point. And so for Emerald Isle to say that we were an fire insurance rating of a 2 or even a 1, which takes a lot of work, that's the lowest you can get is a 1. So in working towards that, our fire inspections, our community risk reduction all play a part into that as well. But those 3 that we got really hit on really hurt us from getting that 2. And so that would help reduce costs to commercial if we go from a 3 to a 2 in the fire insurance aspect. And so as far as trying to meet that full classification of 1710, there's a lot of work going into how departments respond. A lot of fire departments, and especially with fire-based EMS across the nation. Morehead City, the town of Morehead City has worked towards this over the past several years. I think Newport is working on it this year, along with Beaufort, as far as this 1710 standard of getting staffing up to that level, but going towards where you can add additional services. And again, we're just trying to get those 4 personnel there in 4 minutes and then the 8-minute time mark. And so having that available there, we don't necessarily have to have them on that fire truck, fire apparatus. We need to have them there in our community where they can respond quickly to that incident call, no matter if it's an EMS or a fire call, or in our case, a water rescue call.
And just so anyone listening that's not as familiar with it, lowest is good. The lower the rating, the higher the response and all the important stuff with regard to the emergency service delivery. But also it improves, just to your question, the insurance rating, which is real dollars. And when you can lower that commercial insurance cost for all the businesses in town and all those that are classifieds likewise, that's a big, big hit. That's a big improvement for them. You don't see as much improvement in the residential rating, lowering it past 3, but in the commercial, it is big. And that's a good target. I certainly compliment the department. If you can achieve a 2, that is exceptional. There's not that many of them, but everybody's striving for it. But if you can get to a 1, that's even tougher, as he said. It's a harder achievement, but that is really good because you're giving the optimum level of service to your citizens at the lowest cost for their insurance and so forth. So those are good goals to work at. A 1 will probably take a number of years and a number of initiatives on the part of the department and their leadership, but it is not unachievable for a community this size with what it has at stake.
So what would be the fiscal benefits of, like in the flood community rating system? Like if you get to be a 7, you get, the property owners get like a 15% discount on their insurance, flood and hail insurance. Is there, like you said, commercial?
Yeah, so as Manager Martin discussed, anything down below an actual 5, so your residential benefits on your fire insurance rating to that point, and then commercial benefits beyond that. And so us moving from a 3 to a 2, we came from, a 5 to that, on working our way down. Again, that's being a 1 is the best. That would be the only benefit on the fire insurance rating side of things as far as a savings.
Do you know a number? Do you have a number with that?
Percentage of impact
Or
on
total
bills.
savings in the community?
We can check with some insurance companies just to see what that might mean, but it's substantial. Obviously, you've got huge tax values associated with most of your commercial properties, and so it's nothing, it's not insignificant. Not to speak of all the service-wise value that it does to the safety of persons and property, but it is a significant monetary. We'll see if we can get an estimate of percentage-wise what it would mean. I would dare say it's double digits, certainly, just in my experience, but I don't know how many dollars. It would obviously depend on what their policy is and what they're covering, but it would be significant. But maybe we can get some guidance from the insurance rating folks on how much of an impact it might have.
Yeah, I think if we could put that out there and educate the public on that, the return on investment, that'd be a huge plus with that. It would show that it basically would pay for itself and then some, likely.
Yeah, and that would, I just want to remind everybody, that would be a secondary benefit to this request, because that primary benefit being having a quicker EMS response time for our citizens down Coast Guard Road. And so that would be that's the primary ask here, because that data we're able to generate from October 1 in our wintertime was so great. I mean, it was eye-opening to me to be able to track that and see that, my mind, before seeing those metrics, maybe we had 40 or 50 calls down Coast Guard Road, which doesn't negate our response time, but when my job is the level of service that we provide here on Emerald Isle. And so when I'm able to see that number, and I'm like, well, we have a larger problem that we've worked over in the last several years in the ESTF committee with that response time. And, our level of service to Coast Guard Road is not the same level of service that we provide to other areas of Emerald Isle.
How many mutual calls do you get on average? I see your total incidents and type of service. Is that other service or?
No, so what you're seeing there is other services in that as far as the mutual aid calls, but we track that monthly, so the monthly reports that's coming in there, and from January 1 to April 30th, those numbers, I believe, were 73 to Western Carteret, and most of that is either going to be a mutual aid EMS, which we are able to generate revenue from if we transport that patient, and then those false alarms or structure fire calls where they're needing that additional assistance as well, with 27, I believe. I don't have those numbers right off the top of my head, but it is in that April end of the month report.
And how many staff would go out on a mutual aid call? In other words, they wouldn't be here, they'd be like over in Cedar Point fighting that fire that was over there or
Yes,
something.
so if we have an EMS call, we're required by the state to have 2 providers on that ambulance. And so that's who provides that patient care. Again, we're getting revenue, potential revenue back from them from transporting. If it is a fire call, if we have 4 at Fire Station 1, then those 4 go on that truck to provide the staffing needed to adequately mitigate that call. But sometimes it's only 2.
And if we had extra staff, they would be here to watch the house here, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and then they work it out between them. Obviously, we depend on them occasionally and us, but what you don't want to be is grossly under in your capability of offering mutual aid, or you're losing by you leaving your town unprotected, extremely unprotected. So they reposition, and they have complicated ways they do that. So if you had a unit that you might give an example of how you would position in that to cover the local need.
Correct. And so anytime if you radio go off, but we have callbacks. So all of our cellular devices give us the incident calls. We have captains that return. We have full-time personnel that return back to the station to backfill and back staff. But we do move around our levels of service to try to cut down that response time. So if we'll say Station 1 goes off the island right now, Station 2 moves up to what we would consider the center of town of the business district, to cut down that response time to the west and still cover that to the east, which in that meantime, our neighbors at Indian Beach are also listening out, and we will dispatch them if something comes out on those, 1 through 24th Street. So.
And do you require staff, is it a requirement for staff to live in town?
Not to my knowledge, it does not for staff to live in town.
But they do have responsibilities to report if called within a certain period of time.
That is correct.
The other, because we don't want to spend too much more time on this, but I think it's just good information for the public. But the other big thing that it impacts from a budgetary standpoint, the staffing level, its immediate impact is the overtime, and that is a major consideration that you accumulate, and the inability for employees to take time off if it gets negatively impacted when you're understaffed. And particularly if that plays in, that goes back to that environment, the work environment and your retention. If you are forcing these folks to take minimal time off and do overtime, that has negative implications as that accumulates. So another consideration for this. Thank you, Chief.
One question,
go
if you
ahead.
don't mind.
Yeah.
Chief, just a quick question back to the thing. So I was listening to the conversation more about the pay also. Right now, we're currently bottom of the list there, number 5 out of the 5 cities you said that we need.
That's correct.
And how long have, on average, in the last 5 or 6 years, where are we averaged in that 1 through 5? Where are we falling in that ranking? We've never been all the way at the bottom, or is this something new for Emerald Isle?
We made the attempt to, when we merged fire and EMS, the fire department and the EMS department together, we made the attempt to come up, obviously having a crystal ball in our hand, we made the attempt to get on top. And so when we did that, I think some other departments, other municipalities in our area, obviously Morehead City, they're running 5,000 plus calls in a year. And so they're well ahead of everybody else. But after that initial grab, when we merged the two departments into one, we started running back down. Pine Hill Shores is just like 62K. I'm not quoting their numbers verbatim, but they're having 250 EMS calls. Atlantic Beach is right there at around 62 as well, and they're running 500 EMS calls. And so when I look at that, you know, our neighbors next to us who were advertising then, where I could grab those, you know, social media platforms or those job listings from the actual municipalities, and then ask for that public knowledge, that data from our dispatch center to see how many EMS calls we were at. That's when I, you know, came upon that as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's because what we're asking for you to try to get this level higher from 1 to 5, but then at the same sense, we're demanding a high performance of our employees, but we're the same sense of your staff, but we're paying them at the lowest level compared to other 5 cities, and it's just not right. Bottom line, in my opinion, is one commissioner sitting up here.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I would say, and I hope, you know, that the crews would reiterate that we have done to change the culture in the fire department and what we do, and make that, you know, morale a higher level. And so we can only do so much of that, and then we start pulling that data, and we did lose 2 personnel to other departments, a hospital and a neighboring department in fall of 2024. And so can only do so much of that before, you know, it's just too slippery to keep hanging on, where we're a revolving door essentially.
And there's a lot of cost related to training a new employee and all that expense that we eat up. And then we don't want to be in my opinion, we don't want to be a stepping stone for our fire department. We want to keep people here and want to have them here forever. So that we don't want to be we don't want to train Pine Hill Shores people, is the way I look at this. So thanks for your report, and thanks for bringing it to our attention with that side of it. It's very important.
And that's a perfect lead into, we have other department heads here. They're willing to update you on their current situations. I certainly give you my blessings to do that. I know Joe has brought into our attention recent changes in his department where we've lost a couple of folks and potential to lose more. He can't stand much of that with the size of his staffing, and certainly that has implications for the level of service. So I'll defer to him if you have questions for him on his thoughts on that. Chief Panzarella can give you his take on that. He's facing vacancies, and so feel free to ask questions of them about that, or I'll go ahead and say, Chief, do you want to comment on your current situation, just to give the board some enlightenment? Because he's been interviewing. He has done, at our request, Laura and I requested that he do some analysis, and even though it wasn't a paid-for study like you get a lot of them, he did his own analysis in staff of the pay arrangements. So I think in context, it'd be good to hear from the police department how they stack up as well.
Good evening. Currently, we are down 3. As of Friday, we'll be down 4. I've lost several to neighboring agencies just because their starting pay is higher than ours. We did hold a hiring process last Friday. I am looking to replace 3 of those, but I will still have an open position. Now, with that, in that hiring process, I'm still the better part of a month out, getting everything we need to get completed in the background, and get a certification back from Training and Standards. So that's going to put me into the busy season. We're fortunate that we have some dedicated part-time staff that have stepped up and are filling those. There has been 0 lack in services. That just will not happen. But it does put us in a bind. It puts us in a bind with other agencies. I don't know it's necessarily the case, but, you know, robbing from other agencies, other officers. You know, that's just something I've never done. I've never poached from other agencies. If an officer wants to come to work for the town of Emerald Isle, I want them to come to work, but if they're working for another agency, they need to clear that with the agency they're leaving and let them know that, we're not out there poaching them. But, Onslow County just got a significant raise. And they're paying for experience up to 10 years of, prior law enforcement experience. So it makes it difficult for us here. And so that's my current status.
With that short staff you got there, 3 to 4 people too, is that affected, if I was an officer working underneath you and I wanted to take a couple days off, is it hard to get days off now because you're short staffed like that?
100%. Because again, I've got.
So they're overworked in the sense, or would
Yes,
they need
sir.
some time?
Yes, sir. I'm having to move folks around like David Beer, who's solely assigned to community resource, is filling a shift. So it's kind of taken away from some of his duties because he coordinates all of our community programs.
It certainly affects leave credits here like it did, I mentioned. It affects overtime. It affects morale in that respect. But also it affects their training. It's hard to work the training aspect in. So there's a number of implications when you have that large a percentage of your staff that's gone. Any other questions for the chief?
Do we have anything that shows what the salary comparison is for a municipality with 4,000 people and pay scales?
We gathered data from local agencies and submitted that to the
And we
town
can share
manager's
that with
office.
y'all.
Yeah, I'd like to see the pay scales. And
We tried to narrow it to the region where the competition, if you will, the ones, because my experience with this, EMTs, I think, were the most notorious. They used to go for a minimal amount per hour because of their schedules. They can drive somewhere to do a 24-hour schedule. Fortunately, that cuts both ways. We can get these PRNs, the part-timers, but in the emergency medical side of it. But they'll switch jobs for a relatively small amount per hour. Police a little different, but they certainly, we're in a hot market here, and the others are trying to throw money at it and fix it and make themselves more competitive, and unfortunately, that's where we're at.
Other questions?
Any question for the chief? Thank you, chief.
Thank you.
All right, and like I say, Joe, do you want to comment on your situation real quickly, if you don't mind? I think, because this has been a relatively new thing that's popped up with Public Works, but it's significant.
So we're down one now. He just went over to private sector. I couldn't compete what they were offering him for that one. The second one will be leaving, I believe, June 1st. Same situation. He's going over to, I believe, a lumber yard or something, but they offered him $22 an hour to go back to work there. Potentially, we'll possibly losing a third one. I don't know when that'll happen. He went to school to be a law enforcement officer, so he's in the process of scheduling interviews and stuff like that. So I knew it was coming, but we're just not quite sure if anybody, offers him or when that's going to happen. So there's a potential for me to be down 3. I believe I talked to Jen last week. We putting out an offer to one individual we interviewed. And then I trying to schedule between our schedules 3 more interviews. Hopefully with next week we can get those in there. I don't know if it is the pay, it's just our applicant pool is not very big lately. It used to be we'd get 20 applicants, now we're lucky if we get 7. So I did talk to Laura a little bit about hopefully maybe in 26 to 27, we can maybe do a salary study to see what the surrounding communities are paying, just to see if maybe there's something we can do to attract more applicants, or and definitely try to retain who we have so we're not losing any more. That would be my goal.
Joe, a question for you. So before the meeting, I'd stopped by and got me a drink there at McDonald's, and I saw on the window, it said $12 an hour. So McDonald's is paying $12 an hour. Where are you at on part-time person?
Part-time personnel, we're paying $15 an hour. Laura and I did talk about possibly trying to maybe bump that up a little bit because it's strictly, mostly going to be weekend work that we need them.
Where was a full-time person come in at?
Full-time is coming in, well, I could tell you it's
18?
18, yeah, just a little over $18 an hour.
And one of the discussions we'll have here in a few minutes is a way to maybe do some market adjustments in these things. And also regarding the minimum wage, we'd like to bring that up tonight. Thank you, Joe. Any other questions? If not, Candace is here. I don't know if she's not let me know that we're having a similar situation, but it's just relative. It could happen. But in Joe's, one thing you got to remember, is putting that in perspective, that's what percentage of your staff that does that kind of work, Joe, if you lose 3 of his staff. Okay. Then unless you have questions for Candace,
Well, I did notice, it was kind of very noticeable to me that there was not really any community events really being, needing budget discussion or anything, like, aside from I mean, to me, that brings in revenue for those sales tax that we're talking about whenever we have community events, and maybe plans to boost that up something, year-round, something in the off-season, help out with tourism.
we did plan on bringing that up as your next item after we finish this personnel item, to talk about those event discussion.
I've heard some other folks just talking about, like, the tennis courts are cracking, and we just had it patched up, sealed, or something like that. They're cracking again, and then the equipment, I guess, is getting outdated or something in the gym. I don't use the gym that much, so I don't know, but I'm just going on what people tell me.
We can give some feedback on that. I'll have Candace put something together to give you some detail on that. Okay, then the other part of this is the retention. And as I said earlier, the more I've looked at what I've seen our peers doing and the information that Chief Panzarella provided and Chief Mathias on the fire side, it's convinced me that anything that the commission could consider doing to make us more competitive beyond what we've recommended, we based it on the COLA, on the prevailing CPI. And Laura, you've updated that information. I'll let her share that, and then y'all can talk about that.
That's right. In the proposed budget with the 10.25 cent proposed tax rate, we have the 2.5 cents, or 2.5% COLA. Sorry, guys, and so that's baked in there. And then we do have targeted increases, like we mentioned, for medic or other positions. So, and in your handouts, I did want to let you have, this is a table, it's very detailed, but if you see this very detailed handout, and it should be at your desk, this is the consumer price index history. And
I think it's the last sheet in that packet, if you found it.
So, just informational purposes, but we have been tracking real close to what that CPI is.
So,
As far as COLA is
to put that in perspective, if you track the CPI, you pretty much are just treading water. You're not gaining on anything else.
And if you're already behind,
Well, yeah, true. And if anybody else exceeds the CPI, then you further compound it. So with those things said, I've had some feedback from some members of the commission. I don't know if you're prepared to discuss that, but I've had some suggestions if you want to consider doing more. So I'll stop at that.
I know that I inquired of you and Laura to look at doing more, and I asked about a 3% increase for employees versus a 2.5% COLA, and I'm told that that is equivalent to around $37,000. But one thing that I found out in the course of this is that we currently have 11 part-time employees. They're all part-time. We have 11 employees who are making less than $15 an hour. And granted, most of those fall in Parks and Recreation. They're fitness instructors, they're assistant preschool teachers, assistant daycare workers or substitutes, things of that nature. But I think that if we're going to attract quality people in this day and age and economy, we need to make $15 our minimum wage for hirees. And that needs to include bringing those up right now who are anywhere from, anywhere from around $12 to $14 an hour. So we're not talking a significant amount, but, and 0.5% is not significant, but I feel like we need to do a little more for our employees than just COLA, because as I've said many times, that person who's coming in as an equipment operator, I don't know what that annual equates to, but starting at, say, $18.50 an hour, that person's still paying the same amount for a gallon of gas to get to work that someone at $110,000 is paying to get to work. And we've just got to help these employees in any way that we can. And as Mark pointed out, you could probably work a little closer to home for more than what we're paying some of our employees.
And that said, I've taken that to heart and heard the department heads, and we're prepared to make a recommendation if the board is inclined to consider it, whether you do it tonight or in your final adoption or whatever. We just need some feedback so that we're prepared for whenever you do consider action. But if the board is amenable, one option could be to fund additional dollars towards salaries to address the minimum wage to $15, which might create some need for other adjustments so you don't have a compression issue where someone's supervising someone and they're making the same dollar. That's a challenge, but we don't have a lot of those situations, as Commissioner Sanderson just pointed out. There are not that many of them with 11, but they're important too. But to set a message that we're setting a minimum $15 wage, state I just came from working, that was state law that you had to transition to a $15 minimum wage. Started 4 years ago and they had to finish it this year. So that's, just to put it in perspective, that was how important it was there. And so if we consider an additional bump, as commissioners brought up, of 3% or something along that line, instead of 2.5%, coupled with a minimum wage increase to at least $15 and any associated compression issues related to that, that would still leave you additional dollars if you were to consider a 0.25 increase in our recommendation. I can't believe I'm saying it because I've never done that before, but given all the facts and the difficulties we're having in recruitment and retention, you can't just throw money at it. You got to make sure that you're accountable and you're doing all the other things you should do to build morale and boost things. But it would go a long way if we had the additional flexibility of the revenue. You already heard 140 some thousand dollars would be generated. You could pay for an extra 0.5% if that's what you want to do. You could probably go a little higher than that. You could pay for the minimum wage. You could address compression issues and still have some money to do market adjustments for these positions that we're having difficulty retaining and attracting applicants to. And I'll throw that out there. I know that's, again, it's unusual for me this close to when we just did the budget recommendation to, but looking at what's going on around us, I'm hearing, and I think the board should be apprised of your options. And I know that's more than you probably wanted to hear tonight, and again, you don't have to finalize anything tonight, but any direction you can give us, we certainly can make the changes necessary to make that happen. We've already laid out to you, there would be some positive implications if you did bump that rate up. I don't think it puts you in a bad situation compared with our peers, because some are recommending amounts significantly higher than we did above the revenue neutral. Several are. And hardly anybody, I haven't seen but one that's going to be anything less than what we have recommended. So I'll stop with that and see what, you can throw me out or say your opinions.
Well, I know we've had a high turnover in the planning department, and so, and I think.
Same thing applies there.
Having staff in there with good salary also, I think that department's also understaffed, and I think we did good with a full-time code enforcement, get away from the county inspections and have a full-time building inspector, CAMA LPO, code enforcement zoning officer to help out with the planning director. I think that would go a long ways also. And I was just looking right here, it's, that's nearly 10% higher to live in Emerald Isle in North Carolina than anywhere else in North Carolina. And yeah, so if we just go pay the same what the norm is, we're not gonna be able to retain people.
There's also, it's important to note, unless this has changed, and Randy, Jen, you can tell me, it's my understanding that we have not given merit salary increases in quite some time. There is not a merit increase allotted in our budget, nor has there been for a significant amount of time.
That's my understanding. And I don't remember if we had that when I was here the last time.
You did not.
I don't think we did. And I don't know that it's been, but when I say market adjustments, that's essentially what I would say is to try to retain the caliber, quality people we have by doling out some portion of this additional funding towards addressing some of those. Because right now, we don't have the money to have any flexibility other than what was put in the budget, which was targeted at the EMS side of it, the paramedics, and a little bit in the police department to address some of their needs. But this would give us more flexibility and try to get the most bang out of it that we could, if you would be inclined to consider it with that additional money above what you would need if you do the extra 0.5% and the $15 minimum wage. Those are fairly low ticket cost items.
Mark, do you recall any time when the last salary analysis or study was done for the town?
No, the way that I've noticed in my 7 years doing this is we have this discussion and then we try to balance out. We try to be in that 2 to 3. We're not the top pay, as the chief was talking about with Morehead City. We just can't compete. But in the same sense, we wasn't at the bottom either. So if we could we looked at the big picture and we tried to fall between that 2 to 3%. So we didn't really base it on, I guess, an analysis in the sense that we were looking at the big group around, because most of these people have permanent houses here, what we've seen, so that they're going to drive to their next job. I don't think they want to move. But if it's within 30 to 50 miles, they're probably going to take that higher paying job. And what I noticed in my 7 years so far is, and I just came up with a number by studying it myself, was about $5,000 you'll lose a police officer or you'll lose a fireman. And it's roughly a $5,000 deal. And it's interesting with Joe, when Joe's sitting there, and we're talking about the merit thing, and I hadn't thought about that much, but if I come to you, Joe, and I'm one of your employees, and I say, hey, I got a job you're paying me $18, and you're offering me $22 an hour, how can you convince me, now it's all a money game, how can you convince me to stay with Emerald Isle anymore? I mean, that's...
Yeah, the benefits aren't enough to fill that kind of gap.
That kind of gap anymore.
And even if they regret it, because they may go there and then that private company, if it's a private sector, lays them off when the economy goes down, well, the town typically wouldn't do that, and then they want to come back. I've had that experience over the
Yes.
years, particularly in the public works realm where they're equipment operators and they have skill sets that are very easily transferred to the private sector. It makes it really hard to retain. But if you have some flexibility in that discussion you just brought up, where you can say, well, I might can justify because of your performance some bump, you might keep them, because then it's not as big a gap. So I highly recommend that the board do that, and whatever you call it, merit, market, whatever, just not across the board, do what we're doing there. If you want to go with the 3%, I'd certainly recommend that. But have the rest of that money available to go towards those kind of situations during the year. And maybe the town should look at doing a more comprehensive pay analysis, because that takes into consideration a lot of other factors. You pay a little money out, but there are companies that can do that pretty quickly for you before next year's budget cycle, so that you can look at it comprehensively.
Yeah, because they'll take into consideration the location.
Exactly.
Where we live. I mean, we're one of the highest places to live in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And, you know, if we're paying close to minimum wage on that, we can't compete.
And you got to bring people in from the outside, which makes it even more challenging because they got to travel.
Yeah, I think a study would be very fruitful, especially if it'll benefit our employees and enlighten us to, you know, pitch it to the citizens that if we need to increase the budget to retain good quality people, we got something to back us up.
What was the increase from last year in salaries that went across the board? Wasn't it 5 point?
It was on that sheet.
Last year's COLA was 4.
Four?
And we do, I mean, if there could be a targeted merit, but we don't do a blanket merit. So usually we
Correct.
do a blanket COLA, and then if there's a
Targeted.
person, perhaps they got a certification or different things, then the departments will, you know, bake that into that budget, but
Yeah.
not blanketly, yeah.
That's where my head went, targeted merit, based on individual performance. You know, if there's 11 folks that all are earning $15 an hour, I'm all for it. I don't know if I like the idea of just a minimum wage for everybody, but if everybody's earning it, then obviously we should be paying them what they're earning. So I'm all for that. But just to be clear, Randy, what's your recommendation? That would
If you want to consider doing this.
quarter plus 11.
Well, it'd be 11 and a half instead of 11 and a quarter, if you did all of those things.
I'm curious though, as we're talking percentage and numbers now, and I'm just asking in this discussion that says it right here, discussion, how will that bump us up? I mean, I'm still using, we're at number 5. Will that get us to number 2 or number 3? Or is that?
I think it's a step in the right direction. I don't know if it'll get you where you need to be. That's why I'm saying you probably should, in tandem, consider in the next few months doing an analysis of pay more comprehensively and figure out what is it going to take to achieve what you just described, to make yourself more competitive. Obviously, if Atlantic Beach, just use them as an example, I think I remember they were doing 3%. If we do 2.5 and they do 3, that's a widening the gap.
We're following.
And there's a lot of comparisons too. I mean, if it's the total expense, what do you pay out in salaries and the number of people? If you went down one person and spent the same money, everybody would go up. So it's hard to compare direct apples to apples.
Good point.
There's indicators that you can use to benchmark against other communities, but nobody's exactly like us.
No.
So we got to kind of always tie it back. My own experience is you get the best bang out of your salary dollars when you tie it very specifically to performance.
I certainly agree. I think you still have to do some market adjustments to keep yourself, make sure the position salary is competitive, but you can supplement it with merit and get more value because you're at least hanging on to the high performers, hopefully, and not losing them, because we've lost some of those. And if you can keep the high performers and then work on the base, trying to get more competitive with the others over a series of years, you can have a much better chance of success than we're currently having.
And if we, going into the insurance with 9%, the potential for 9% savings, I'd like to turn that money back into the salaries if we could too also.
And that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, we're reinvesting in other things that are important to the employee's salary. Because it's a package deal. Rather than just winning that savings, you're creating additional revenue that gives you that flexibility. But did that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay. So if the board would consider that, I don't know if you want to see if you got a consensus on that, we can go ahead and prepare the documents. Laura's already told you what it would do to that average cost. $1 is what we're talking about to the average property, $1 a month, $12 a year. Is that right? I sound like a commercial. But in any event, if you're, I don't want to push you, but if you're in a mood to do that, then we certainly would recommend you consider it and give us some guidance so that we can have it for you to take action, either tonight on that part or collectively for the budget at the time after the hearing on the 10th.
I'd like to make a motion then that we proceed with putting these numbers together. And I know it's short notice, and so I don't expect a detail, but I'd also like to see the potential cost for a salary survey incorporated into these figures as well. So that gives us the opportunity to at least be prepared to tackle that, if not this year, in the next budget year. But one thing that's been done in the past is that comparisons have been made with the League of Municipalities salary surveys, which they do annually. Mm-hmm. And that has been done for towns our size, and then the next size up with an average coming up then. I think it's been quite some time since we've looked at that, Laura, if I'm not wrong. We pull it, but don't do we haven't done a comparison where our salaries rate with those and the next category up in a while.
Comprehensively, okay. We haven't.
Comprehensive, thank you.
Yeah, you're right.
We've done it on select positions.
Yes.
And we'll do it internally and, yeah, but.
Yep.
And another point, you avoided that cost on the manager search, so that maybe is another way to invest in the rest of the employees. The money we might have spent, although I think for the salary analysis that you're speaking of, we're probably talking about a fairly nominal amount. I would consider 20,000 or so would probably get you ballpark or less of what you want, and give you some really good data that you could factor in over the next 2 or 3 years. And because some units in the county have done that. They did portion this year, portion next year, portion the next year. At least the employees would see that on the horizon and might encourage them to stick around.
Randy, I'm going to ask the hard question now. Were any cuts looked at anywhere in the budget?
Yeah, I think we gave you that with, what was it, a little over $250,000. We did do reductions. Honestly, some of them were in what we're talking about right now, monies that were requested for market adjustments to boost some of the pay. We did do some capital items. I think there might have been some personnel. Help me out, Laura, with some of the other. She's got a breakdown of them, but it was a little 260,000 or change or somewhere in that range.
The departments came together and we compiled their request, and so in the department request, it is in the book, and then we went ahead and in certain areas, in the police department, we did not fulfill the full amount of overtime and part-time, but we did in the full-time, so we reduced that category in police, and then the bucket truck was a big ticket item that we delayed. So it's still in the CIP as a future need, but we did not recommend that in the recommended column. So part of that process as we're working through that is we're looking at those requests, and sometimes when we have to come to balance, and then we'll have those conversations and say, can we do it, or do you have savings in the current year where you can buy it? And so there was also some small equipment in both fire and public works that we asked if they could find cost savings to get tools now and maybe not push it into that 26 budget. So, and that's kind of that process, and that's how we, came to that balancing and that cost savings, if you will. So that was the immediate in the budget prep, if that helps.
And did we look at any other innovative revenue sources?
Not new innovative revenue sources this year, but there's some on the horizon that potentially the town could look at, and I would highly recommend you. It takes a while to do that. We didn't have time since March when I arrived to get a lot of that analysis done, but some of the legislative activity is showing some potential opportunities, and there probably are some others. One of them being something that's been mentioned previously when you were talking about the budget, is looking at a way to assess cost of some of the rental properties to make it more equitable between the single-family homeowners' cost. One example that jumps into mind is the cart costs for the carts for solid waste collection and the other services we offer. That, to me, is a no-brainer. We definitely need to come up with a way other than the county taxing method that's currently used. I don't suggest abandoning that and starting a billing and collection process with the staff, because that would be a burden. But there ought to be a way to identify those units and come up with a fair and equitable system where they're paying their fair share for those services. And that we didn't project revenue from that, but I highly recommended that the city look at that and come up with a way to do it. And Frank and I have talked about it, and I think there's some options that can be done. And then there's some of the other potential new revenue sources beyond what we talked about earlier, trying to protect our share of the sales tax and some of the other things. I'd encourage the town to do that so that you're spreading those costs to the users. Because anytime there's a user fee, that's the fairest thing you can do to assess the cost, rather for user services, like solid waste is an easy example, but there's some others. Not emergency services, obviously. Those should be given to everybody, regardless of ability to pay. But we also talked about making sure we did look at whether there was any benefit this year. And we did bump some rates. I know Linda came in late and recommended some changes in some of our fees. We need to do a more comprehensive analysis of all the fee structure and see if some of them are dated or need to be increased to adequately pay for the cost of those services. But and we do have a few of those included in here in the planning and inspection fee category. What were some others, Laura, that we had? I think there were a few other miscellaneous ones that we...
Really, it was primarily the, I'm tongue-tied tonight. Solid waste was the big one, of course, that you just mentioned, and then the zoning fees. That was really it. We didn't really...
And parking fees, just, that can only go back toward parking lot. And
I've had some discussions with that, and yes, but I think there's still, we do have a couple of minor ones in here on the parking because the town had actually agreed to one, but it wasn't implemented apparently in the previous schedule. You want to mention those, Laura?
Yep, so we have in the recommended April 1st to September 30th with a maximum $20 per day. Currently it's $16 a day. So that would give a little bit more on that maximum. And then last year we did the flat $4 per hour instead of a sliding scale at the parking. So that slight changes, but we expect that we would have some, a little bit more revenue in that line item. I can't talk tonight. And we did budget for that.
And some of our peers are already at $5. Obviously, Commissioner Sampson has a lot more knowledge in that area, but she and I have had a discussion about that. What things could the town consider to try to boost that revenue? going
I
forward.
know last year I got a long list of contracts that we have with vendors for various whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we've done a good exhaustive review of those.
I haven't since I've been here, but it needs to be done. Anytime you can do that, it makes for a better product, because some of them might need to be changed and more competitively priced.
Yep, and just to, the April 1st to September 30th, I believe it was mid-April to mid-September, and so having those extra 2 weeks on both end will also allow us to collect a little bit more parking fees on the parking side, so.
The last item that we were going to report on tonight, I can sum it up pretty quickly, I think. We looked at the couple of events that were mentioned for consideration. Frank and I collaborated. He even pursued one of the possibilities related to the fireworks. My assessment at this point is, and you've got a report in there, the chief didn't go over it, but it gives you the technical side in terms of compliance, and he'll be glad to answer any questions if you want to get into that tonight regarding the fireworks. But honestly, at this point, I believe we've missed the window to be able to order, everything I've heard and feedback I've had. Secondly, we've got to figure out where you're going to do it, because the owner, where it previously was done, hasn't agreed. Whether they will or not is yet to be determined, but I'd say it's a long shot, as Frank put it, to even get that done ever, but certainly not this year. So I think just from the public standpoint, I don't see it in the cards this year. But I don't think that's something you should just slam the door on. You ought to evaluate it, look at these requirements, and figure out how it could be done. And partnerships is always the way to go, I believe, with something like that, and get sponsors and so forth, if you're able to pull it off. With regard to the beach festival, something near and dear to my heart that I certainly would advocate for from a personal standpoint, because I've loved coming to the event here. I think it's too late this year to get on the entertainment cycle and get commitments from bands, the available dates. It would be really hard pressed to do it, in my estimation, between now and the fall, before it's too late in the season. And there's a lot of competition on some of that with certain dates, but it's certainly something you could look at for the following year. And I think that's a prime opportunity to get partnerships and leverage dollars, private sector dollars, to sponsor that kind of event. I know we've got people here that's worked with it. Alicia has worked with it for years. And of course, Candace has had some experience with it, but I'll defer to them if they want to add anything. But my guess is you should make a priority list of what you want to see in additional events, either of those or both, and anything else to generate your goal of traffic, community involvement, boosting tourism, and the board have a work session just on that topic. You want to add anything, Commissioner?
I will add that I've had some discussions with a representative of Emerald Isle Vets and with the Emerald Isle Business Association, and I'm probably going to be meeting with both of those individuals, potentially more from their groups. But there is some interest in reviving the Beach Music Festival, and I know that a scaled-down version was done at what was 77 West last year, which is now Thirsty Surfer. Emerald Isle Vets has looked at that as a potential for, again, a scaled-down version. And the alternative that I offered was the possibility of those two groups partnering and requesting permission from the town to use the existing Beach Music Festival stage, which was built for that. It already has all the electrical requirements in place, ample parking. Those two groups could, on their own, could not obtain DOT right-of-way parking, whereas the town can get that and has in the past. So I think that we could look at a potential great partnership. One of the Emerald Isle for Veterans representatives has already spoken to several of the local businesses, according to them. I don't know whom, but donations have, and sponsorships, she believes, have been fairly generous, ranging anywhere from 500 to thousands. So I think that that's something that we would definitely benefit from them doing. And if they can take the lead in it and us partner with them, and possibly an in-kind sponsorship or a small monetary one, then that may be a win-win for everyone.
Year. Good, well said. I apologize, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and Commission.
For what?
We had a motion.
There's a motion on the floor. I was going to
And,
remind you.
We went down a rabbit hole on a couple of things.
Yeah.
My apologies.
Let me back up.
But I do think that would be very helpful to the staff if you're inclined to do that tonight.
Yeah.
I would repeat my motion that we please ask staff to put together all the numbers for a 3% COLA, as well as a $15 minimum wage, and that we seek at least a few options on the potential cost of a salary survey to move forward to or to aim towards in future budgets.
All right, there's a motion on the floor by Commissioner Sanders.
Just a question on the motion. You want to include that any balance with regard to the.
Yes, I would include that
funding.
any balance would be used to offer, to bring other targeted positions into a better position.
And do you want to consider the recommendation of this be funded with a?
I would like to also include in that be funded with a 25-cent tax increase.
25 hundredths.
I'm sorry?
25 hundredths of a cent.
25 hundredths, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Lori, it's wearing off. I'm sitting too close to you. Yeah, it is. Did you get that, Jen? Yes. 25 hundredths of a cent. Did I cover everything that time?
You did.
Thank you.
And I apologize for distracting it.
No.
And by no way am I going to repeat all that. Is there any questions on that motion by any other commissioners?
That's just to put the numbers together.
Yeah, putting the numbers together, but we need some time, and we'll put that before you, and it would be included for your consideration at the public hearing.
And what about the, like doing the salary analysis?
That would be
I put
included.
that in there.
That's
We
in
Got that in there, yeah.
Yeah, that we
By like
look at,
a firm that would come in and.
Yeah.
I asked for
Independent
some
analysis.
prices in that motion.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
independent study or analysis.
There's a motion on the floor. Need a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passed 100%.
Awesome. I thank you for that, and on behalf of the employees, they deserve it, and I think that speaks volumes for this commission's commitment to the personnel in Emerald Isle,
Thank you. I'm glad it is.
that you'll consider that.
All right, that covers number 10, other updates and special events. Are there any other areas in that? We're at the point for questions and answers from the Board of Commissioners. I'll start with Commissioner Sanderson and go across. Do you have anything?
I appreciate everyone's work on this so far, and I appreciate the board's openness to looking at other ways that we can incentivize our employees and try to show at least a smidgen of our appreciation for all they do.
Kudos to everybody who's worked on this budget and department heads, staff, everybody that just, that makes this a great community to live in, a family beach. And appreciate Randy coming in and Linda coming in to help out, filling in, and looking forward to great things coming up ahead. Thanks.
I think we skipped ahead to the comments, right? We did the Q&A while we were going through this. So I first would like to say thank you to everybody for all your hard work on this. It really is a blessing to have such great town, such great staff, putting this thoughtful budget together. I love Alicia's idea about the Beach Music Festival. I said, let's get on that and get the Business Association and EI for Bets launched on that. I know they're going to do a great job with it. So let's definitely move that ball forward. Yeah, this has been great. was getting my head around the extra penny to get 11 and a quarter. I still gotta, think more about the extra quarter point. I'm all for, like I said, staff are the greatest asset we have. They run neck and neck with that beach out there that everybody comes to visit, but the staff really make it beautiful and make this a great place to visit and a great place to live. And I'm all for rewarding people for good work. So we'll work through these numbers. Laura, I appreciate, I know this is a non-trivial task to go through and do these updates, so I appreciate all your hard work on that, and looking forward to get this one done.
Thank you.
All right, just reading through a couple of things here. So we got public hearing and adoption of the minutes. We'll plan on that for the June 10th, 2025 is in the notes here. So this was a discussion meeting. We kind of got thoughts on which way we're heading, how we want to head with the next meeting. So when Mayor Holland takes over June 10th, we'll bring it up for a hearing and adoption of what we've talked about tonight. As far as comments from the town clerk, do you have anything, ma'am?
On the calendar?
For the public hearing, do they need to vote on
I'm not sure.
No, I don't think we have to vote on it now.
it? Because we have to,
It has to be advertised, is it?
Yeah.
But I think we voted on it when we adopted the budget calendar, because that's in there at that time. I may be wrong, but
Yeah, June 10th was.
correct.
Yeah.
If we
I think
need to
you're right.
vote on it, we can do it right now. To adopt, do we need to?
Just to cover the bases, I'll make a motion that we requested the town clerk advertise for a public hearing on the 25-26 budget at our June 10th meeting.
All right, there's a motion on the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
We're covered either way.
thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, anything from you, ma'am? You good?
Not for me, thanks.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for your motion for increasing the salaries of, our employees and merit pay and the increased COLA. From an HR perspective, it's great for retention and recruitment, which has been a little difficult since it is very expensive to live in Emerald Isle now, so.
Or anywhere in the vicinity.
Or anywhere near here.
Thank you. Nice hearing your comments.
Jason would be so proud.
I know Jason's not here to hear it.
Do you have anything, Laura, yourself?
No, I think I've got my marching orders. We have some numbers to crunch, and we'll bring it back again on June 10th. I don't believe we have any other workshops in between now and the 10th, so.
Unless they
I don't think
schedule.
we need one.
You do or you don't?
I don't.
Oh, yeah. I think you've covered the landscape unless there's other issues, and you, of course, can cover them that night, and you don't have to adopt that night. It's your option, but you can schedule anything else you need, either at that meeting or after that meeting, if you feel like you've got to delve into something else. And I'd encourage you, if you have other questions, some of you have been in touch with us and let us know, and we're prepared tonight based on that. Get me or get them to us, and we'll do our homework and have you answer so that you get comfortable with the budget, any elements of it that you're not comfortable with now.
And I hope that people at home are watching the meeting so that, because I really would like to make sure they're engaged with this.
Me too.
I'm looking forward to hearing the public input on this, and I know we're going to have a public hearing, but not many people come to it. And so maybe if we could come to them in another way, maybe even have a couple little smaller just gatherings for people to have an opportunity to speak up. Maybe they wouldn't do it at a town meeting, but maybe they would do it in a more informal setting.
Well, and if they're not watching tonight, they'll have the opportunity to watch it on repeat and reruns, and I'll certainly recommend that any citizen get in touch with us if they have an issue, pro or con, with anything discussed or need questions answered. Let's get that as soon as possible so that we can get them answers.
As long as we don't have more than two commissioners together, we can meet with a group of people if they want to talk. And
Sure. I encourage you to get in touch with your constituents in any manner you want to do that is allowed, and give us that feedback. If you hear things like we heard about these events that seem to have a great following, and hopefully they've gotten an answer, and we've got a great idea of cooking now on at least one of them, and the other one, I will leave to y'all to look at, and you've got plenty of time to do it before next year. Looking at your options and come up with a plan. But there's no excuse for this town not having a robust tourism promotional schedule of events that encourages people to come here and spend their money.
That's
And have a
something
good
I'm working
time.
on for next year's tourism management plan, so.
Yeah,
we'll see.
and I'll certainly discuss that with the director, and I'm sure she's got ideas of her own on that she'll be glad to share.
All right, and for myself, thanks for putting up with me as Mayor Pro Temp, managing the meeting tonight. I really want to thank the leadership of our staff coming out and helping us and enlightening, because it makes a huge difference when we hear what you tell us and what's going on with your employees and what your staff is going individually. It's a huge help for me personally and for the rest of the board. I'll speak for them on that, because it opens our eyes up to what's going on and what's happening in the staff. And we were all elected here to serve the people of Emerald Isle, the citizens. But part of that is having a great staff that can serve them. And if we drop the ball and we can't support the staff, then the staff can't support the citizens. So that's what we're here for. And that's why we ran. We came here to try to make a difference. So hopefully we've heard what you've talked about. We know what your needs are. You reached out to us, and we're going to do the best this commissioner is, and the rest I'm sure will too, with the budget to try to figure out what we can do the best and what we need at this time. So thanks for putting up with me. Thanks for the opportunity to sit up here tonight. And if no more further questions,
Make a motion, we adjourn.
let's please. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are officially adjourned.
3 hours, but great job.